Driven to Win presents The Red House of Mystery by A. Christie. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more thrilling and mysterious stories like this one. Now, settle in, turn off distractions, and let's step together into a world of secrets, suspense, and intrigue. The story begins. Chapter 1. Mrs. Stevens is frightened. In the drowsy heat of the summer afternoon, the Red House was taking its siesta. There was a lazy murmur of bees in the flower borders, a gentle cooing of pigeons in the tops of the elms. From distant lawns came the whir of a mowing machine, that most restful of all country sounds, making ease the sweeter in that it is taken while others are working. It was the hour when even those whose business it is to attend to the wants of others have a moment or two for themselves. In the housekeeper's room, Audrey Stevens, the pretty parlor maid, retrimmed her best hat and talked idly to her aunt, the cook-housekeeper of Mr. Mark Ablett's bachelor home. "For Joe?" said Mrs. Stevens placidly, her eye on the hat. Audrey nodded. She took a pin from her mouth, found a place in the hat for it, and said, "He likes a bit of pink." "I don't say I mind a bit of pink myself," said her aunt. "Joe Turner isn't the only one." "It isn't everybody's color," said Audrey, holding the hat out at arm's length and regarding it thoughtfully. "Stylish, isn't it?" "Oh, it'll suit you all right, and it would have suited me at your age. A bit too dressy for me now, though wearing better than some other people, I dare say. I was never the one to pretend to be what I wasn't. If I'm 55, I'm 55. That's what I say. 58, isn't it, Auntie?" "I was just giving that as an example," said Mrs. Stevens with great dignity. Audrey threaded a needle, held her hand out, and looked at her nails critically for a moment, and then began to sew. "Funny thing that about Mr. Mark's brother. Fancy not seeing your brother for 15 years. She gave a self-conscious laugh and went on. "Wonder what I should do if I didn't see Joe for 15 years. As I told you all this morning," said her aunt, "I've been here 5 years and never heard of a brother. I could say that before everybody if I was going to die tomorrow. There's been no brother here while I've been here. You could have knocked me down with a feather when he spoke about him at breakfast this morning. I didn't hear what went before, naturally, but they was all talking about the brother when I went in. Now what was it I went in for? Hot milk, was it, or toast? Well, they was all talking, and Mr. Mark turns to me and says, you know his way. 'Stevens,' he says, 'my brother is coming to see me this afternoon. I'm expecting him about 3, he says. Show him into the office, he says, just like that. 'Yes, sir,' I says quite quietly. But I was never so surprised in my life, not knowing he had a brother. 'My brother from Australia,' he says. There, I'd forgotten that. From Australia. Well, he may have been in Australia, said Mrs. Stevens judicially. I can't say for that, not knowing the country, but what I do say is he's never been here, not while I've been here, and that's 5 years. Well, but Auntie, he hasn't been here for 15 years. I heard Mr. Mark telling Mr. Cayley. 15 years, he says. Mr. Cayley having arsed him when his brother was last in England. Mr. Cayley knew of him. I heard him telling Mr. Beverley. But didn't know when he was last in England, see? So that's why he arsed Mr. Mark. I'm not saying anything about 15 years, Audrey. I can only speak for what I know, and that's 5 years Whitsuntide. I can take my oath he's not set foot in the house since 5 years Whitsuntide. And if he's been in Australia, as you say, well, I dare say he's had his reasons. What reasons? Said Audrey lightly. Never mind what reasons. Being in the place of a mother to you, since your poor mother died, I say this, Audrey, when a gentleman goes to Australia, he has his reasons. And when he stays in Australia 15 years, as Mr. Mark says, and as I know for myself, for 5 years, he has his reasons. And a respectably brought-up girl doesn't ask what reasons. Got into trouble, I suppose, said Audrey carelessly. They were saying at breakfast he'd been a wild one. Debts. I'm glad Joe isn't like that. He's got £15 in the post office savings bank. Did I tell you? But there was not to be any more talk of Joe Turner that afternoon. The ringing of a bell brought Audrey to her feet. No longer Audrey, but now Stevens. She arranged her cap in front of the glass. There, that's the front door, she said. That's him. Show him into the office, said Mr. Mark. I suppose he doesn't want the other ladies and gentlemen to see him. Well, they're all out at their golf anyhow. Wonder if he's going to stay. Perhaps he's brought back a lot of gold from Australia. I might hear something about Australia, because if anybody can get gold there, then I don't say, but what Joe and I. Now, get on, Audrey. Just going, darling. She went out. To anyone who had just walked down the drive in the August sun, the open door of the Red House revealed a delightfully inviting hall, of which even the mere sight was cooling. It was a big, low-roofed, oak-beamed place with cream-washed walls and diamond-paned windows, blue-curtained. On the right and left were doors leading into other living rooms, but on the side which faced you as you came in were windows again, looking on to a small grass court, and from open windows to open windows, such air as there was played gently. The staircase went up in broad, low steps along the right-hand wall, and turning to the left, led you along a gallery, which ran across the width of the hall to your bedroom. That is, if you were going to stay the night. Mr. Robert Ablett's intentions in this matter were as yet unknown. As Audrey came across the hall, she gave a little start as she saw Mr. Cayley suddenly, sitting unobtrusively in a seat beneath one of the front windows, reading. No reason why he shouldn't be there. Certainly a much cooler place than the golf links on such a day. But somehow there was a deserted air about the house that afternoon, as if all the guests were outside, or, perhaps the wisest place of all, up in their bedrooms, sleeping. Mr. Cayley, the master's cousin, was a surprise, and having given a little exclamation as she came suddenly upon him, she blushed and said, "Oh, I beg your pardon, sir. I didn't see you at first." And he looked up from his book and smiled at her. An attractive smile it was on that big, ugly face. Such a gentleman, Mr. Cayley, she thought to herself, as she went on, and wondered what the master would do without him. If this brother, for instance, had to be bundled back to Australia, it was Mr. Cayley who would do most of the bundling. "So this is Mr. Robert," said Audrey to herself, as she came in sight of the visitor. She told her aunt afterwards that she would have known him anywhere for Mr. Mark's brother. But she would have said that in any event. Actually, she was surprised. Dapper little Mark, with his neat, pointed beard and his carefully curled mustache, with his quick darting eyes, always moving from one to the other of any company he was in, to register one more smile to his credit when he had said a good thing, one more expectant look when he was only waiting his turn to say it. He was a very different man from this rough-looking, ill-dressed colonial, staring at her so loweringly. "I want to see Mr. Mark Ablett," he growled. It sounded almost like a threat. Audrey recovered herself and smiled reassuringly at him. She had a smile for everybody. "Yes, sir. He is expecting you if you will come this way." "Oh, so you know who I am, eh?" "Mr. Robert Ablett." "Eh, that's right. So he's expecting me, eh? He'll be glad to see me, eh?" "If you will come this way, sir," said Audrey primly. She went to the second door on the left and opened it. "Mr. Robert she began, and then broke off. The room was empty. She turned to the man behind her. "If you will sit down, sir, I will find the master. I know he's in, because he told me that you were coming this afternoon." "Oh." He looked round the room. "What do you call this place, eh?" "The office, sir." "The office?" "The room where the master works, sir." "Works, eh? That's new. Didn't know he'd ever done a stroke of work in his life." "Where he writes, sir," said Audrey with dignity. The fact that Mr. Mark wrote, though nobody knew what, was a matter of pride in the housekeeper's room. "Not well dressed enough for the drawing room, eh?" "I will tell the master you are here, sir," said Audrey decisively. She closed the door and left him there. Well, here was something to tell Auntie. Her mind was busy at once, going over all the things which he had said to her, and she had said to him, quiet-like. Directly I saw him, I said to myself, "Why, you could have knocked her over with a feather." Feathers, indeed, were a perpetual menace to Audrey. However, the immediate business was to find the master. She walked across the hall to the library, glanced in, came back a little uncertainly, and stood in front of Cayley. "If you please, sir," she said in a low, respectful voice, "can you tell me where the master is? It's Mr. Robert called." "What?" said Cayley, looking up from his book. "Who?" Audrey repeated her question. "I don't know. Isn't he in the office? He went up to the temple after lunch. I don't think I've seen him since." "Thank you, sir. I will go up to the temple." Cayley returned to his book. The temple was a brick summer house in the gardens at the back of the house, about 300 yards away. Here, Mark meditated sometimes before retiring to the office to put his thoughts upon paper. The thoughts were not of any great value. Moreover, they were given off at the dinner table more often than they got onto paper, and got onto paper more often than they got into print. But that did not prevent the master of the Red House from being a little pained when a visitor treated the temple carelessly, as if it had been erected for the ordinary purposes of flirtation and cigarette smoking. There had been an occasion when 2 of his guests had been found playing fives in it. Mark had said nothing at the time, save to ask with a little less than his usual point, whether they couldn't find anywhere else for their game. But the offenders were never asked to the Red House again. Audrey walked slowly up to the temple, looked in, and walked slowly back. All that walk for nothing. Perhaps the master was upstairs in his room. Not well dressed enough for the drawing room. "Well now, Auntie, would you like anyone in your drawing room with a red handkerchief round his neck and great big dusty boots? And listen." One of the men shooting rabbits. Auntie was partial to a nice rabbit and onion sauce. How hot it was! She wouldn't say no to a cup of tea. Well, one thing, Mr. Robert wasn't staying the night. He hadn't any luggage. Of course, Mr. Mark could lend him things. He had clothes enough for 6. She would have known him anywhere for Mr. Mark's brother. She came into the house. As she passed the housekeeper's room on her way to the hall, the door opened suddenly, and a rather frightened face looked out. "Hallo, Aud," said Elsie. "It's Audrey," she said, turning into the room. "Come in, Audrey," called Mrs. Stevens. "What's up?" said Audrey, looking in at the door. "Oh, my dear, you gave me such a turn. Where have you been?" "Up to the temple. Did you hear anything?" Hear what? Bangs and explosions and terrible things. Oh, said Audrey, rather relieved. One of the men shooting rabbits. Why, I said to myself as I came along, Auntie's partial to a nice rabbit, I said, and I shouldn't be surprised if— Rabbits, said her aunt, scornfully. It was inside the house, my girl. Straight it was, said Elsie. She was one of the housemaids. I said to Mrs. Stevens, didn't I, Mrs. Stevens? That was in the house, I said. Audrey looked at her aunt and then at Elsie. Do you think he had a revolver with him? She said in a hushed voice. Who? Said Elsie, excitedly. That brother of his, from Australia. I said as soon as I set eyes on him, you're a bad lot, my man. That's what I said, Elsie, even before he spoke to me. Rude. She turned to her aunt. Well, I give you my word. If you remember, Audrey, I always said there was no saying with anyone from Australia. Mrs. Stevens lay back in her chair, breathing rather rapidly. I wouldn't go out of this room now. Not if you paid me £100,000. Oh, Mrs. Stevens, said Elsie, who badly wanted 5 shillings for a new pair of shoes. I wouldn't go as far as that, not myself, but— There! Cried Mrs. Stevens, sitting up with a start. They listened anxiously, the 2 girls instinctively coming closer to the older woman's chair. A door was being shaken, kicked, rattled. Listen! Audrey and Elsie looked at each other with frightened eyes. They heard a man's voice, loud, angry. Open the door! It was shouting. Open the door! I say open the door! Don't open the door! Cried Mrs. Stevens, in a panic, as if it was her door which was threatened. Audrey, Elsie, don't let him in. Damn it, open the door, came the voice again. We're all going to be murdered in our beds, she quavered. Terrified, the 2 girls huddled closer, and with an arm round each, Mrs. Stevens sat there, waiting. Chapter 2. Mr. Gillingham gets out at the wrong station. Whether Mark Ablett was a bore or not depended on the point of view, but it may be said at once that he never bored his company on the subject of his early life. However, stories get about. There is always somebody who knows. It was understood, and this, anyhow, on Mark's own authority, that his father had been a country clergyman. It was said that, as a boy, Mark had attracted the notice and patronage of some rich old spinster of the neighborhood who had paid for his education, both at school and university. At about the time when he was coming down from Cambridge, his father had died, leaving behind him a few debts as a warning to his family, and a reputation for short sermons as an example to his successor. Neither warning nor example seems to have been effective. Mark went to London with an allowance from his patron and, it is generally agreed, made acquaintance with the moneylenders. He was supposed by his patron and any others who inquired to be writing. But what he wrote, other than letters asking for more time to pay, had never been discovered. However, he attended the theaters and music halls very regularly, no doubt with a view to some serious articles in The Spectator on the decadence of the English stage. Fortunately, from Mark's point of view, his patron died during his 3rd year in London and left him all the money he wanted. From that moment, his life loses its legendary character and becomes more a matter of history. He settled accounts with the moneylenders, abandoned his crop of wild oats to the harvesting of others, and became in his turn a patron. He patronized the arts. It was not only usurers who discovered that Mark Ablett no longer wrote for money. Editors were now offered free contributions as well as free lunches. Publishers were given agreements for an occasional slender volume, in which the author paid all expenses and waived all royalties. Promising young painters and poets dined with him, and he even took a theatrical company on tour, playing host and lead with equal lavishness. He was not what most people call a snob. A snob has been defined carelessly as a man who loves a lord, and, more carefully, as a mean lover of mean things, which would be a little unkind to the peerage if the first definition were true. Mark had his vanities undoubtedly, but he would sooner have met an actor-manager than an earl. He would have spoken of his friendship with Dante, had that been possible, more glibly than of his friendship with the Duke. Call him a snob if you like, but not the worst kind of snob. A hanger-on, but to the skirts of art, not society. A climber, but in the neighborhood of Parnassus, not Hay Hill. His patronage did not stop at the arts. It also included Matthew Cayley, a small cousin of 13, whose circumstances were as limited as had been Mark's own before his patron had rescued him. He sent the Cayley cousin to school and Cambridge. His motives, no doubt, were unworldly enough at first, a mere repaying to his account in the recording angel's book of the generosity which had been lavished on himself, a laying up of treasure in heaven. But it is probable that, as the boy grew up, Mark's designs for his future were based on his own interests as much as those of his cousin, and that a suitably educated Matthew Cayley of 23 was felt by him to be a useful property for a man in his position. A man, that is to say, whose vanities left him so little time for his affairs. Cayley, then, at 23, looked after his cousin's affairs. By this time, Mark had bought the Red House and the considerable amount of land which went with it. Cayley superintended the necessary staff. His duties, indeed, were many. He was not quite secretary, not quite land agent, not quite business advisor, not quite companion, but something of all four. Mark leant upon him and called him K, objecting quite rightly in the circumstances to the name of Matthew. K, he felt, was, above all, dependable, a big, heavy-jawed, solid fellow, who didn't bother you with unnecessary talk, a boon to a man who liked to do most of the talking himself. Cayley was now 28, but had all the appearance of 40, which was his patron's age. Spasmodically, they entertained a good deal at the Red House, and Mark's preference, call it kindliness or vanity, as you please, was for guests who were not in a position to repay his hospitality. Let us have a look at them as they came down to that breakfast, of which Stevens, the parlour-maid, has already given us a glimpse. The first to appear was Major Rumbold, a tall, gray-haired, gray-mustached, silent man, wearing a Norfolk coat and gray flannel trousers, who lived on his retired pay and wrote natural history articles for the papers. He inspected the dishes on the side table, decided carefully on kedgeree, and got to work on it. He had passed on to a sausage by the time of the next arrival. This was Bill Beverly, a cheerful young man in white flannel trousers and a blazer. "Hello, Major," he said as he came in. "How's the gout?" "It isn't gout," said the Major gruffly. "Well, whatever it is," the Major grunted. "I make a point of being polite at breakfast," said Bill, helping himself largely to porridge. "Most people are so rude. That's why I asked you. But don't tell me if it's a secret. Coffee?" he added, as he poured himself out a cup. "No thanks. I never drink," till I've finished eating." "Quite right, Major. It's only manners." He sat down opposite to the other. "Well, we've got a good day for our game. It's going to be dashed hot, but that's where Betty and I score. On the 5th green, your old wound, the one you got in that frontier skirmish in '43, will begin to trouble you. On the 8th, your liver, undermined by years of curry, will drop to pieces. On the 12th, oh, shut up, you ass. Well, I'm only warning you. Hello. Good morning, Miss Norris. I was just telling the Major what was going to happen to you and him this morning. Do you want any assistance, or do you prefer choosing your own breakfast?" "Please don't get up," said Miss Norris. "I'll help myself." "Good morning, Major." She smiled pleasantly at him. The Major nodded. "Good morning. Going to be hot." "As I was telling him," began Bill, "that's where—" "Hello, here's Betty. Morning, Kaylee." Betty Calladine and Kaylee had come in together. Betty was the 18-year-old daughter of Mrs. John Calladine, widow of the painter, who was acting hostess on this occasion for Mark. Ruth Norris took herself seriously as an actress, and, on her holidays, seriously as a golfer. She was quite competent as either. Neither the stage society nor Sandwich had any terrors for her. "By the way, the car will be round at 10:30, said Kaylee, looking up from his letters. "You're lunching there and driving back directly afterwards. Isn't that right?" "I don't see why we shouldn't have 2 rounds, said Bill hopefully. "Much too hot in the afternoon," said the Major. "Get back comfortably for tea." Mark came in. He was generally the last. He greeted them and sat down to toast and tea. Breakfast was not his meal. The others chattered gently while he read his letters. "Good God," said Mark suddenly. There was an instinctive turning of heads towards him. "I beg your pardon, Miss Norris." "Sorry, Betty." Miss Norris smiled her forgiveness. She often wanted to say it herself, particularly at rehearsals. "I say, Kay." He was frowning to himself, annoyed, puzzled. He held up a letter and shook it. "Who do you think this is from?" Kaylee, at the other end of the table, shrugged his shoulders. How could he possibly guess? "Robert," said Mark. "Robert?" It was difficult to surprise Kaylee. "Well, it's all very well to say 'well' like that," said Mark peevishly. "He's coming here this afternoon. I thought he was in Australia or somewhere." "Of course, so did I." He looked across at Rumbold. "Got any brothers, Major?" "No." "Well, take my advice and don't have any." "Not likely to now," said the Major. Bill laughed. Miss Norris said politely, "But you haven't any brothers, Mr. Ablett." "One," said Mark grimly. "If you're back in time, you'll see him this afternoon. He'll probably ask you to lend him £5. Don't." Everybody felt a little uncomfortable. "I've got a brother," said Bill helpfully, "but I always borrow from him." "Like Robert," said Mark. "When was he in England last?" asked Kaylee. "About 15 years ago, wasn't it?" "You'd have been a boy, of course." "Yes, I remember seeing him once about then, but I didn't know if he had been back since." "No, not to my knowledge." Mark, still obviously upset, returned to his letter. "Personally," said Bill, "I think relations are a great mistake." "All the same," said Betty a little daringly, "it must be rather fun having a skeleton in the cupboard." Mark looked up, frowning. "If you think it's fun, I'll hand him over to you, Betty. If he's anything like he used to be, and like his few letters have been, well, Kay knows." Kaylee grunted. "All I knew was that one didn't ask questions about him. It may have been meant as a hint to any too curious guest not to ask more questions, or a reminder to his host not to talk too freely in front of strangers." although he gave it the sound of a mere statement of fact. But the subject dropped, to be succeeded by the more fascinating one of the coming foursome. Mrs. Calladine was driving over with the players in order to lunch with an old friend who lived near the links, and Mark and Kaylee were remaining at home on affairs. Apparently, affairs were now to include a prodigal brother, but that need not make the foursome less enjoyable. At about the time when the Major, for whatever reasons, was fluffing his tee shot at the 16th, and Mark and his cousin were at their business at the Red House, an attractive gentleman of the name of Anthony Gillingham was handing up his ticket at Woodhen Station and asking the way to the village. Having received directions, he left his bag with the station master and walked off leisurely. He is an important person to this story, so that it is as well we should know something about him before letting him loose in it. Let us stop him at the top of the hill on some excuse and have a good look at him. The first thing we realize is that he is doing more of the looking than we are. Above a clean-cut, clean-shaven face, of the type usually associated with the Navy, he carries a pair of gray eyes which seem to be absorbing every detail of our person. To strangers, this look is almost alarming at first, until they discover that his mind is very often elsewhere, that he has, so to speak, left his eyes on guard, while he himself follows a train of thought in another direction. Many people do this, of course, when, for instance, they are talking to one person and trying to listen to another. But their eyes betray them. Antony's never did. He had seen a good deal of the world with those eyes, though never as a sailor. When at the age of 21 he came into his mother's money, £400 a year, old Gillingham looked up from the Stockbreeder's Gazette to ask what he was going to do. "See the world," said Antony. "Well, send me a line from America, or wherever you get to." "Right," said Antony. Old Gillingham returned to his paper. Antony was a younger son, and on the whole, not so interesting to his father as the cadets of certain other families, Champion Burkitt's, for instance. But then, Champion Burkitt was the best Hereford bull he had ever bred. Antony, however, had no intention of going further away than London. His idea of seeing the world was to see, not countries, but people, and to see them from as many angles as possible. There are all sorts in London, if you know how to look at them. So Antony looked at them, from various strange corners, from the viewpoint of the valet, the newspaper reporter, the waiter, the shop assistant. With the independence of £400 a year behind him, he enjoyed it immensely. He never stayed long in one job, and generally closed his connection with it by telling his employer, contrary to all etiquette as understood between master and servant, exactly what he thought of him. He had no difficulty in finding a new profession. Instead of experience and testimonials, he offered his personality and a sporting bet. He would take no wages the first month, and, if he satisfied his employer, double wages the second. He always got his double wages. He was now 30. He had come to Woodham for a holiday because he liked the look of the station. His ticket entitled him to travel further, but he had always intended to please himself in the matter. Woodham attracted him, and he had a suitcase in the carriage with him and money in his pocket. Why not get out? The landlady of the George was only too glad to put him up, and promised that her husband would drive over that afternoon for his luggage. "And you would like some lunch, I expect, sir?" "Yes, but don't give yourself any trouble about it. Cold anything you've got." "What about beef, sir?" she asked, as if she had 100 varieties of meat to select from, and was offering him her best. "That will do splendidly. And a pint of beer." While he was finishing his lunch, the landlord came in to ask about the luggage. Anthony ordered another pint and soon had him talking. "It must be rather fun to keep a country inn," he said, thinking that it was about time he started another profession. "I don't know about fun, sir. It gives us a living and a bit over." "You ought to take a holiday," said Anthony, looking at him thoughtfully. "Funny thing you're saying that," said the landlord with a smile. "Another gentleman over from the Red House was saying that only yesterday, offered to take my place and all." He laughed rumblingly. "The Red House? Not the Red House Stanton?" "That's right, sir. Stanton's the next station to Woodham. The Red House is about a mile from here. Mr. Ablett's." Anthony took a letter from his pocket. It was addressed from the Red House, Stanton, and signed Bill. "Good old Bill," he murmured to himself. "He's getting on." Anthony had met Bill Beverly 2 years before in a tobacconist's shop. Gillingham was on one side of the counter and Mr. Beverly on the other. Something about Bill, his youth and freshness perhaps, attracted Anthony, and when cigarettes had been ordered, and an address given to which they were to be sent, he remembered that he had come across an aunt of Beverly's once at a country house. Beverly and he met again a little later at a restaurant. Both of them were in evening dress, but they did different things with their napkins, and Anthony was the more polite of the two. However, he still liked Bill, so on one of his holidays, when he was unemployed, he arranged an introduction through a mutual friend. Beverly was a little inclined to be shocked when he was reminded of their previous meetings, but his uncomfortable feeling soon wore off, and he and Anthony quickly became intimate. But Bill generally addressed him as "dear." Anthony decided to stroll over to the Red House after lunch and call upon his friend. Having inspected his bedroom, which was not quite the lavender-smelling country inn bedroom of fiction, but sufficiently clean and comfortable, he set out over the fields. As he came down the drive and approached the old red brick front of the house, there was a lazy murmur of bees in the flower borders, a gentle cooing of pigeons in the tops of the elms, and from distant lawns the whir of a mowing machine, that most restful of all country sounds. And in the hall, a man was banging at a locked door and shouting, "Open the door, I say! Open the door!" "Hello," said Anthony in amazement. Chapter 3. 2 Men and a Body. Kaylee looked round suddenly at the voice. "Can I help?" said Anthony politely. "Something's happened," said Kaylee. He was breathing quickly. "I heard a shot. It sounded like a shot. I was in the library. A loud bang. I didn't know what it was. And the door's locked." He rattled the handle again and shook it. "Open the door," he cried. "I say, Mark, what is it? Open the door." "But he must have locked the door on purpose," said Anthony. "So why should he open it just because you ask him to?" Kaylee looked at him in a bewildered way. Then he turned to the door again. "We must break it in," he said, putting his shoulder to it. "Help me." "Isn't there a window?" Kaylee turned to him stupidly. "Window? Window? So much easier to break in a window," said Anthony with a smile. He looked very cool and collected as he stood just inside the hall, leaning on his stick and thinking, no doubt, that a great deal of fuss was being made about nothing. But then he had not heard the shot. Window, Of course. What an idiot I am. He pushed past Anthony and began running out into the drive. Anthony followed him. They ran along the front of the house, down a path to the left, and then to the left again over the grass. Kaylee in front, the other close behind him. Suddenly, Kaylee looked over his shoulder and pulled up short. "Here," he said. They had come to the windows of the locked room, French windows, which opened onto the lawns at the back of the house. But now they were closed. Anthony couldn't help feeling a thrill of excitement as he followed Kaylee's example and put his face close up to the glass. ... For the first time, he wondered if there really had been a revolver shot in this mysterious room. It had all seemed so absurd and melodramatic from the other side of the door. But if there had been one shot, why should there not be two more at the careless fools who were pressing their noses against the panes and asking for it? "My God, can you see it?" said Kaylee in a shaking voice. "Down there. Look." The next moment, Anthony saw it. A man was lying on the floor at the far end of the room, his back towards them. A man? Or the body of a man? "Who is it?" said Anthony. "I don't know," the other whispered. "Well, we'd better go and see." He considered the windows for a moment. "I should think if you put your weight into it, just where they join, they'll give all right. Otherwise, we can kick the glass in." Without saying anything, Kaylee put his weight into it. The window gave, and they went into the room. Kaylee walked quickly to the body and dropped on his knees by it. For the moment he seemed to hesitate. Then with an effort, he put a hand onto its shoulder and pulled it over. "Thank God," he murmured, and let the body go again. "Who is it?" said Anthony. "Robert Ablett." "Oh," said Anthony. "I thought his name was Mark," he added, more to himself than to the other. "Yes, Mark Ablett lives here. Robert is his brother." He shuddered and said, "I was afraid it was Mark." "Was Mark in the room too?" "Yes," said Kaylee absently. Then, as if resenting suddenly these questions from a stranger, "Who are you?" But Anthony had gone to the locked door and was turning the handle. "I suppose he put the key in his pocket," he said as he came back to the body again. "Ooh!" Anthony shrugged his shoulders. "Whoever did this," he said, pointing to the man on the floor. "Is he dead?" "Help me," said Kaylee simply. They turned the body onto its back, nerving themselves to look at it. Robert Ablett had been shot between the eyes. It was not a pleasant sight, and with his horror, Anthony felt a sudden pity for the man beside him, and a sudden remorse for the careless, easy way in which he had treated the affair. But then one always went about imagining that these things didn't happen, except to other people. It was difficult to believe in them just at first, when they happened to yourself. "Did you know him well?" said Anthony quietly. He meant, were you fond of him? "Hardly at all. Mark is my cousin. I mean, Mark is the brother I know best." "Your cousin?" "Yes." He hesitated and then said, "Is he dead?" "I suppose he is. Will you know anything about that sort of thing?" "Perhaps I'd better get some water." There was another door opposite to the locked one, which led, as Anthony was to discover for himself directly, into a passage from which opened two more rooms. Kaylee stepped into the passage and opened the door on the right. The door from the office, through which he had gone, remained open. The door, at the end of the short passage, was shut. Anthony, kneeling by the body, followed Kaylee with his eyes, and after he had disappeared, kept his eyes on the blank wall of the passage, but he was not conscious of that at which he was looking. for his mind was with the other man, sympathizing with him. "Not that water is any use to a dead body," he said to himself, "but the feeling that you're doing something when there's obviously nothing to be done is a great comfort." Cayley came into the room again. He had a sponge in one hand, a handkerchief in the other. He looked at Anthony. Anthony nodded. Cayley murmured something and knelt down to bathe the dead man's face. Then he placed the handkerchief over it. A little sigh escaped Anthony, a sigh of relief. They stood up and looked at each other. "If I can be of any help to you," said Anthony, "please let me." "That's very kind of you. There will be things to do. Police, doctors, I don't know. But you mustn't let me trespass on your kindness. Indeed, I should apologize for having trespassed so much already. I came to see Beverly. He is an old friend of mine. He's out playing golf. He will be back directly." Then, as if he had only just realized it, "They will all be back directly. I will stay if I can be of any help. Please do. You see, there are women. It will be rather painful, if you would." He hesitated and gave Anthony a timid little smile, pathetic in so big and self-reliant a man. "Just your moral support, you know. It would be something." "Of course." Anthony smiled back at him and said cheerfully, "Well then, I'll begin by suggesting that you should ring up the police." "The police?" "Yes." He looked doubtfully at the other. "I suppose." Anthony spoke frankly. "Now look here, Mr. Cayley. I'm Mark Ablett's cousin. I live with him. My name's Gillingham. I'm sorry, I ought to have told you before. Well now, Mr. Cayley, we shan't do any good by pretending. Here's a man been shot. Well, somebody shot him." "He might have shot himself," mumbled Cayley. "Yes, he might have, but he didn't. Or if he did, somebody was in the room at the time, and that somebody isn't here now. And that somebody took a revolver away with him. Well, the police will want to say a word about that, won't they?" Cayley was silent, looking on the ground. "Oh, I know what you're thinking, and believe me, I do sympathize with you. But we can't be children about it. If your cousin Mark Ablett was in the room with this," he indicated the body, "this man, then who said he was?" said Cayley, jerking his head up suddenly at Anthony. "You did." "I was in the library. Mark went in. He may have come out again. I know nothing. Somebody else may have gone in." Yes," said Anthony patiently, as if to a little child. "You know your cousin. I don't. Let's agree that he had nothing to do with it. But somebody was in the room when this man was shot, and, well, the police will have to know. Don't you think?" He looked at the telephone. "Or would you rather I did?" Cayley shrugged his shoulders and went to the telephone. "May I, look round a bit?" Anthony nodded towards the open door. "Oh, do. Yes." He sat down and drew the telephone towards him. "You must make allowances for me, Mr. Gillingham. You see, I've known Mark for a very long time. But of course, you are quite right, and I'm merely being stupid." He took off the receiver. "Let us suppose that, for the purpose of making a first acquaintance with this office, we are coming into it from the hall, through the door which is now locked, but which, for our special convenience, has been magically unlocked for us. As we stand just inside the door, the length of the room runs right and left, or, more accurately, to the right only, for the left-hand wall is almost within our reach. Immediately opposite to us, across the breadth of the room, some 15 feet, is that other door, by which Cayley went out and returned a few minutes ago. In the right-hand wall, 30 feet away from us, are the French windows. Crossing the room and going out by the opposite door we come into a passage from which two rooms lead. The one on the right, into which Kaylee went, is less than half the length of the office, a small, square room, which has evidently been used some time or other as a bedroom. The bed is no longer there, but there is a basin with hot and cold taps in a corner, chairs, a cupboard or two, and a chest of drawers. The window faces the same way as the French windows in the next room, but anybody looking out of the bedroom window has his view on the immediate right shut off by the outer wall of the office, which projects, by reason of its greater length, 15 feet further into the lawn. The room on the other side of the bedroom is a bathroom. The three rooms together, in fact, form a sort of private suite, used, perhaps, during the occupation of the previous owner by some invalid who could not manage the stairs, but allowed by Mark to fall into disuse, save for the living room. At any rate, he never slept downstairs. Anthony glanced at the bathroom and then wandered into the bedroom, the room into which Kaylee had been. The window was open, and he looked out at the well-kept grass beneath him and the peaceful stretch of park beyond. And he felt very sorry for the owner of it all, who was now mixed up in so grim a business. "Kaylee thinks he did it," said Anthony to himself. "That's obvious. It explains why he wasted so much time banging on the door. Why should he try to break a lock when it's so much easier to break a window? Of course, he might just have lost his head. On the other hand, he might have wanted to give his cousin a chance of getting away. The same about the police and, lots of things. Why, for instance, did we run all the way round the house in order to get to the windows? Surely there's a back way out through the hall. I must have a look later on." Anthony, it will be observed, had by no means lost his head. There was a step in the passage outside, and he turned round to see Kaylee in the doorway. He remained looking at him for a moment, asking himself a question. It was rather a curious question. He was asking himself why the door was open. Well, not exactly why the door was open. That could be explained easily enough. But why had he expected the door to be shut? He did not remember shutting it, but somehow he was surprised to see it open now, to see Kaylee through the doorway, just coming into the room. Something working subconsciously in his brain had told him that it was surprising. Why? He tucked the matter away in a corner of his mind for the moment. The answer would come to him later on. He had a wonderfully retentive mind. Everything which he saw or heard seemed to make its corresponding impression somewhere in his brain, often without his being conscious of it. And these photographic impressions were always there, ready for him when he wished to develop them. Kaylee joined him at the window. "I've telephoned," he said. "They're sending an inspector or someone from Middleston, and the local police and doctor from Stanton." He shrugged his shoulders. "We're in for it now." How far away is Middleston? It was the town for which Anthony had taken a ticket that morning, only 6 hours ago. How absurd it seemed. About 20 miles. These people will be coming back soon. Beverly and the others? Yes, I expect they'll want to go away at once. Much better that they should. Yes. Kaylee was silent for a little. Then he said, "You're staying near here? I'm at the George at Woodham. If you're by yourself, I wish you'd put up here. You see," he went on awkwardly, "you'll have to be here for the inquest and so on. If I may offer you my cousin's hospitality and his, if he doesn't, if he really has." Anthony broke in hastily with his thanks and acceptance. "That's good. Perhaps Beverly will stay on. If he's a friend of yours, he's a good fellow." Anthony felt quite sure, from what Kaylee had said and had hesitated to say, that Mark had been the last to see his brother alive. It didn't follow that Mark Ablett was a murderer. Revolvers go off accidentally, and when they have gone off, people lose their heads and run away, fearing that their story will not be believed. Nevertheless, when people run away, whether innocently or guiltily, one can't help wondering which way they went. "I suppose this way," said Anthony aloud, looking out of the window. "Who?" said Kaylee stubbornly. "Well, whoever it was," said Anthony, smiling to himself. "The murderer. Or, let us say, the man who locked the door after Robert Ablett was killed. I wonder, well, how else could he have got away? He didn't go by the windows in the next room because they were shut. Isn't that rather odd? Well, I thought so at first, but..." He pointed to the wall jutting out on the right. "You see, you're protected from the rest of the house if you get out here, and you're quite close to the shrubbery. If you go out at the French windows, I imagine you're much more visible. All that part of the house," he waved his right hand, "the west, well, northwest almost, where the kitchen parts are, you see, you're hidden from them here." Oh yes, he knew the house, whoever it was, and he was quite right to come out of this window. He'd be into the shrubbery at once. Kaylee looked at him thoughtfully. "It seems to me, Mr. Gillingham, that you know the house pretty well, considering that this is the first time you've been to it." Anthony laughed. "Oh, well, I notice things, you know. I was born noticing. But I'm right, aren't I, about why he went out this way?" "Yes, I think you are." Kaylee looked away, towards the shrubbery. "Do you want to go noticing in there now?" He nodded at it. "I think we might leave that to the police," said Anthony gently. Well, there's no hurry." Kaylee gave a little sigh, as if he had been holding his breath for the answer, and could now breathe again. "Thank you, Mr. Gillingham," he said. Oh, Chapter 4. The Brother from Australia. Guests at the Red House were allowed to do what they liked, within reason. The reasonableness or otherwise of it being decided by Mark. But when once they, or Mark, had made up their minds as to what they wanted to do, the plan had to be kept. Mrs. Calladine, who knew this little weakness of their hosts, resisted, therefore, the suggestion of Bill that they should have a second round in the afternoon and drive home comfortably after tea. The other golfers were willing enough, but Mrs. Calladine, without actually saying that Mr. Ablett wouldn't like it, was firm on the point that having arranged to be back by 4, they should be back by 4. "I really don't think Mark wants us, you know," said the Major. Having played badly in the morning, he wanted to prove to himself in the afternoon that he was really better than that. With this brother of his coming, he'll be only too glad to have us out of the way. "Of course he will, Major." This from Bill. "You'd like to play, wouldn't you, Miss Norris?" Miss Norris looked doubtfully at the hostess. "Of course, if you want to get back, dear, we mustn't keep you here. Besides, it's so dull for you, not playing." "Just 9 holes, Mother," pleaded Betty. "The car could take you back, and you could tell them that we were having another round, and then it could come back for us," said Bill brilliantly. "It's certainly much cooler here than I expected," put in the Major. Mrs. Calladine fell. It was very pleasantly cool outside the golf house, and of course Mark would be rather glad to have them out of the way. So she consented to 9 holes, and the match having ended all square, and everybody having played much better than in the morning, they drove back to the Red House, very well pleased with themselves. "Hallo," said Bill to himself as they approached the house. "Isn't that old Tony?" Anthony was standing in front of the house, waiting for them. Bill waved, and he waved back. Then, as the car drew up, Bill, who was in front with the chauffeur, jumped down and greeted him eagerly. "Hello, you madman. Have you come to stay or what?" He had a sudden idea. "Don't say you're Mark Ablett's long-lost brother from Australia, though I could quite believe it of you." He laughed oyishly. "Hello, Bill," said Anthony quietly. "Will you introduce me? I'm afraid I've got some bad news." Bill, rather sobered by this, introduced him. The Major and Mrs. Calladine were on the near side of the car, and Anthony spoke to them in a low voice. "I'm afraid I'm going to give you rather a shock," he said. "Robert Ablett, Mr. Mark Ablett's brother, has been killed." He jerked a thumb over his shoulder. "In the house." "Good God," said the Major. "Do you mean that he has killed himself?" asked Mrs. Calladine. "Just now?" "It was about 2 hours ago. I happened to come here." He half turned to Beverly and explained. "I was coming to see you, Bill, and I arrived just after the death. Mr. Cayley and I found the body. Mr. Cayley being busy just now. There are police and doctors and so on in the house. He asked me to tell you. He says that no doubt you would prefer, the house party having been broken up in this tragic way, to leave as soon as possible." He gave a pleasant, apologetic little smile and went on. "I am putting it badly, but what he means, of course, is that you must consult your own feelings in the matter entirely, and please make your own arrangements about ordering the car for whatever train you wish to catch. There is one this evening, I understand, which you could go by if you wished it." Bill gazed with open mouth at Anthony. He had no words in his vocabulary to express what he wanted to say, other than those the Major had already used. Betty was leaning across to Miss Norris and saying, "Who's killed?" in an awe-struck voice, and Miss Norris, who was instinctively looking as tragic as she looked on the stage when a messenger announced the death of one of the cast, stopped for a moment in order to explain. Mrs. Calladine was quietly mistress of herself. "We shall be in the way, yes, I quite understand," she said. "But we can't just shake the dust of the place off our shoes because something terrible has happened there. I must see Mark, and we can arrange later what to do. He must know how very deeply we feel for him. Perhaps we—" She hesitated. "The Major and I might be useful anyway," said Bill. "Isn't that what you mean, Mrs. Calladine?" "Where is Mark?" said the Major suddenly, looking hard at Anthony. Anthony looked back unwaveringly and said nothing. "I think," said the Major gently, leaning over to Mrs. Calladine, "that it would be better if you took Betty back to London tonight." "Very well," she agreed quietly. "You will come with us, Ruth?" "I'll see you safely there," said Bill in a meek voice. He didn't quite know what was happening, and having expected to stay at the Red House for another week, he had nowhere to go to in London. But London seemed to be the place that everyone was going to. And when he could get Tony alone for a moment, Tony no doubt would explain. "Cayley wants you to stay, Bill. You have to go anyhow tomorrow," Major rumbled. "Yes, I'll come with you, Mrs. Calladine. Mr. Cayley would wish me to say again that you will please not hesitate to give your own orders, both as regard the car and as regard any telephoning or telegraphing that you want done." He smiled again and added, "Please forgive me if I seem to have taken a good deal upon myself, but I just happened to be handy as a mouthpiece for Cayley." He bowed to them and went into the house. "Well," said Miss Norris dramatically. As Anthony re-entered the hall, the inspector from Middleston was just crossing into the library with Cayley. The latter stopped and nodded to Anthony. "Wait a moment, Inspector. Here's Mr. Gillingham. He'd better come with us. And then to Anthony, "This is Inspector Birch." Birch looked inquiringly from one to the other. "Mr. Gillingham and I found the body together," explained Cayley. "Oh, well, come along, and let's get the facts sorted out a bit. I like to know where I am, Mr. Gillingham." "We all do." "Oh." He looked at Anthony with interest. "Do you know where you are in this case?" "I know where I'm going to be." "Where's that?" "Put through it by Inspector Birch," said Anthony with a smile. The inspector laughed genially. "Well, I'll spare you as much as I can. Come along." They went into the library. The inspector seated himself at a writing table, and Cayley sat in a chair by the side of it. Anthony made himself comfortable in an armchair and prepared to be interested. "We'll start with the dead man," said the inspector. "Robert Ablett, didn't you say?" He took out his notebook. "Yes, brother of Mark Ablett, who lives here." "Ah." He began to sharpen a pencil. "Staying in the house?" "Oh, no." Anthony listened attentively while Cayley explained all that he knew about Robert. This was news to him. "I see. Sent out of the country in disgrace. What had he done?" "I hardly know. I was only about 12 at the time. The sort of age when you're told not to ask questions. Inconvenient questions?" "Exactly. So you don't really know whether he had been merely wild or wicked?" "No. Old Mr. Ablett was a clergyman," added Cayley. "Perhaps what might seem wicked to a clergyman might seem only wild to a man of the world." "I dare say, Mr. Cayley," smiled the inspector. "Anyhow, it was more convenient to have him in Australia." "Yes." "Mark Ablett never talked about him." "Hardly ever. He was very much ashamed of him and, well, very glad he was in Australia." "Did he write Mark sometimes?" "Occasionally. Perhaps 3 or 4 times in the last 5 years. Asking for money?" "Something of the sort. I don't think Mark always answered them. As far as I know, he never sent any money." "Now your own private opinion, Mr. Cayley. Do you think that Mark was unfair to his brother? Unduly hard on him?" "They'd never liked each other as boys. There was never any affection between them. I don't know whose fault it was in the first place, if anybody's. Still, Mark might have given him a hand?" "I understand," said Cayley, "that Robert spent his whole life asking for hands." The inspector nodded. "I know that sort. Well now, we'll go on to this morning. This letter that Mark got. Did you see it?" "Not at the time. He showed it to me afterwards." "Any address?" "No. A half sheet of rather dirty paper." "Where is it now?" "I don't know. In Mark's pocket, I expect." "Ah." He pulled at his beard. "Well, we'll come to that. Can you remember what it said?" "As far as I remember, something like this: 'Mark, your loving brother is coming to see you tomorrow, all the way from Australia. I give you warning, so that you will be able to conceal your surprise, but not, I hope, your pleasure. Expect him at 3 or thereabouts.'" Ah. The inspector copied it down carefully. "Did you notice the postmark?" "London." "And what was Mark's attitude?" "Annoyance, disgust." Cayley hesitated. "Apprehension?" No, not exactly. Or rather, apprehension of an unpleasant interview, not of any unpleasant outcome for himself." "You mean that he wasn't afraid of violence or blackmail or anything of that sort?" "He didn't appear to be." "Right. Now then, he arrived, you say, about 3 o'clock?" "Yes, about that." "Who was in the house then?" "Mark and myself, and some of the servants. I don't know which." "Of course, you will ask them directly, no doubt." "With your permission, no guests?" "They were out all day playing golf," explained Cayley. "Oh, by the way," he put in, "if I may interrupt a moment, will you want to see them at all?" It isn't very pleasant for them now, naturally, and I suggested, he turned to Anthony, who nodded back to him, I understand that they want to go back to London this evening. There's no objection to that, I suppose. You will let me have their names and addresses in case I want to communicate with them? Of course. One of them is staying on, if you would like to see him later, but they only came back from their golf as we crossed the hall. That's all right, Mr. Cayley. Well, now then, let's go back to 3 o'clock. Where were you when Robert arrived? Cayley explained how he had been sitting in the hall, how Audrey had asked him where the master was, and how he had said that he had last seen him going up to the temple. She went away, and I went on with my book. There was a step on the stairs, and I looked up to see Mark coming down. He went into the office, and I went on with my book again. I went into the library for a moment to refer to another book, and when I was in there, I heard a shot. At least, it was a loud bang. I didn't sure if it was a shot. I stood and listened. Then I came slowly to the door and looked out. Then I went back again, hesitated a bit, and finally decided to go across to the office and make sure that it was all right. I turned the handle of the door and found it was locked. Then I got frightened, and I banged at the door and shouted and, well, that was when Mr. Gillingham arrived. He went on to explain how they had found the body. The inspector looked at him with a smile. Yes, well, we shall have to go over some of that again, Mr. Cayley. Mr. Mark, now, you thought he was in the temple. Could he have come in and gone up to his room without your seeing him? There are back stairs. He wouldn't have used them in the ordinary way, of course. But I wasn't in the hall all the afternoon. He might easily have gone upstairs without my knowing anything about it. So that you weren't surprised when you saw him coming down? Oh, not a bit. Well, did he say anything? He said, Robert's here, or something of the sort. I suppose he'd heard the bell, or the voices in the hall. Which way does his bedroom face? Could he have seen him coming down the drive? He might have, yes. Well then, I said yes, and he gave a sort of shrug and said, Don't go too far away, I might want you, and then went in. What did you think he meant by that? Well, he consults me a good deal, I'm his sort of unofficial solicitor in a kind of way. This was a business meeting rather than a brotherly one? Oh yes, that's how he regarded it, I'm sure. Yes. How long was it before you heard the shot? Very soon. 2 minutes, perhaps. The inspector finished his writing, and then regarded Cayley thoughtfully. Suddenly, he said, What is your theory of Robert's death? Cayley shrugged his shoulders. You've probably seen more than I've seen, he answered. It's your job. I can only speak as a layman and Mark's friend. Well, then I should say that Robert came here meaning trouble, and bringing a revolver with him. He produced it almost at once. Mark tried to get it from him. There was a little struggle perhaps, and it went off. Mark lost his head, finding himself there with a revolver in his hand and a dead man at his feet. His one idea was to escape. He locked the door almost instinctively, and then, when he heard me hammering at it, went out of the window. Yes. Well, that sounds reasonable enough. What do you say, Mr. Gillingham? I should hardly call it reasonable to lose your head, said Anthony, getting up from his chair and coming towards them. Well, you know what I mean. It explains things. Oh yes, any other explanation would make them much more complicated. Have you any other explanation? Not I. Are there any points on which you would like to correct Mr. Cayley? Anything that he left out after you arrived here? No, thanks. He described it all very accurately. Ah, Well now, about yourself. You're not staying in the house, I gather? Antony explained his previous movements. Yes. Did you hear the shot? Antony put his head on one side, as if listening. Yes, just as I came in sight of the house. It didn't make any impression at the time, but I remember it now. Where were you then? Coming up the drive. I was just in sight of the house. Nobody left the house by the front door after the shot? Antony closed his eyes and considered. Nobody, he said. No. You're certain of that? Absolutely, said Antony, as though rather surprised that he could be suspected of a mistake. Thank you. You're at the George if I want you? Mr. Gillingham is staying here until after the inquest, explained Kaylee. Good. Well now, about these servants. Chapter 5. Mr. Gillingham chooses a new profession. As Kaylee went over to the bell, Antony got up and moved to the door. Well, you won't want me, I suppose, Inspector, he said. No, thank you, Mr. Gillingham. You'll be about, of course. Oh, yes. The inspector hesitated. I think, Mr. Kaylee, it would be better if I saw the servants alone. You know what they are. The more people about, the more they get alarmed. I expect I can get at the truth better by myself. Oh, quite so, in fact. I was going to ask you to excuse me. I feel rather responsible towards these guests of ours. Although Mr. Gillingham very kindly, he smiled at Antony, who was waiting at the door, and left his sentence unfinished. Ah, that reminds me, said the inspector. Didn't you say that one of your guests, Mr. Beverly was it, a friend of Mr. Gillingham's, was staying on? Yes. Would you like to see him? Afterwards, if I may. I'll warn him. I shall be up in my room if you want me. I have a room upstairs where I work. Any of the servants will show you. Ah, Stevens, Inspector Birch would like to ask you a few questions. Yes, sir, said Audrey primly, but inwardly fluttering. The housekeeper's room had heard something of the news by this time, and Audrey had had a busy time explaining to other members of the staff exactly what he had said and what she had said. The details were not quite established yet, but this much at least was certain, that Mr. Mark's brother had shot himself and spirited Mr. Mark away, and that Audrey had seen at once that he was that sort of man when she opened the door to him. She had passed the remark to Mrs. Stevens, and Mrs. Stevens, if you remember, Audrey, had always said that people didn't go away to Australia except for very good reasons. Elsie agreed with both of them, but she had a contribution of her own to make. She had actually heard Mr. Mark in the office threatening his brother. You mean Mr. Robert, said the second parlor maid. She had been having a little nap in her room, but she had heard the bang. In fact, it had woken her up, just like something going off it was. It was Mr. Mark's voice, said Elsie firmly. Pleading for mercy, said an eager-eyed kitchen maid hopefully from the door, and was hurried out again by the others, wishing that she had not given her presence away. But it was hard to listen in silence when she knew so well from her novelettes just what happened on these occasions. I shall have to give that girl a piece of my mind, said Mrs. Stevens. Well, Elsie? He said, I heard him say it with my own ears. It's my turn now, he said, triumphant-like. Well, if you think that's a threat, dear, you're very particular, I must say. But Audrey remembered Elsie's words when she was in front of Inspector Birch. She gave her own evidence with the readiness of one who had already repeated it several times, and was examined and cross-examined by the inspector with considerable skill. The temptation to say, never mind about what you said to him, was strong, but he resisted it, knowing that in this way he would discover best what he said to her. By this time, both his words and the looks he gave her were getting their full value from Audrey, but the general meaning of them seemed to be well established. Then you didn't see Mr. Mark at all? No, sir. He must have come in before and gone up to his room. Or come in by the front door, likely enough, while I was going out by the back. Yes, well, I think that's all that I want to know. Thank you very much. Now what about the other servants? Elsie heard the master and Mr. Robert talking together, said Audrey eagerly. He was saying, Mr. Mark, I mean. Ah, well, I think Elsie had better tell me that herself. Who is Elsie, by the way? One of the housemaids. Shall I send her to you, sir? Please. Elsie was not sorry to get the message. It interrupted a few remarks from Mrs. Stevens about Elsie's conduct that afternoon, which were, Elsie thought, much better interrupted. In Mrs. Stevens' opinion, any crime committed that afternoon in the office was as nothing to the double crime committed by the unhappy Elsie. For Elsie realized too late that she would have done better to have said nothing about her presence in the hall that afternoon. She was bad at concealing the truth, and Mrs. Stevens was good at discovering it. Elsie knew perfectly well that she had no business to come down the front stairs, and it was no excuse to say that she happened to come out of Miss Norris's room just at the head of the stairs, and didn't think it would matter, as there was nobody in the hall. And what was she doing anyhow in Miss Norris's room at that time? Returning a magazine? Lent by Miss Norris, might she ask? Well, not exactly lent. Really, Elsie. And this in a respectable house? In vain for poor Elsie to plead that a story by her favorite author was advertised on the cover, with a picture of the villain falling over the cliff. That's where you'll go to, my girl, if you aren't careful, said Mrs. Stevens firmly. But of course, there was no need to confess all these crimes to Inspector Birch. All that interested him was that she was passing through the hall and heard voices in the office. And stopped to listen. Certainly not, said Elsie with dignity, feeling that nobody really understood her. I was just passing through the hall, just as you might have been yourself, and not supposing they was talking secrets, didn't think to stop my ears, as no doubt I ought to have done. And she sniffed slightly. Come, come, said the inspector soothingly. I didn't mean to suggest. Everyone is very unkind to me, said Elsie between sniffs. And there's that poor man lying dead there, and sorry they'd have been, if it had been me, to have spoken to me as they have done this day. Nonsense! We're going to be very proud of you. I shouldn't be surprised if your evidence were of very great importance. Now then, what was it you heard? Try to remember the exact words. Something about working in a passage, thought Elsie. Yes, but who said it? Mr. Robert. How do you know it was Mr. Robert? Had you heard his voice before? I don't take it upon myself to say that I had had any acquaintance with Mr. Robert, but seeing that it wasn't Mr. Mark, nor yet Mr. Cayley, nor any other of the gentlemen, and Miss Stevens had shown Mr. Robert into the office not 5 minutes before. Quite so, said the inspector hurriedly. Mr. Robert, undoubtedly. Working in a passage? That was what it sounded like, sir. Working a passage over. Could that have been it? That's right, sir, said Elsie eagerly. He'd worked his passage over. Well? And then Mr. Mark said loudly, sort of triumphant-like, It's my turn now, you wait. Triumphantly? As much as to say his chance had come. And that's all you heard? That's all, sir. Not standing there listening, but just passing through the hall as it might be any time. Yes, well, that's really very important, Elsie. Thank you. Elsie gave him a smile and returned eagerly to the kitchen. She was ready for Mrs. Stevens or anybody now. Meanwhile, Antony had been exploring a little on his own. There was a point which was puzzling him. He went through the hall to the front of the house and stood at the open door, looking out onto the drive. He and Cayley had run round the house to the left. Surely it would have been quicker to have run round to the right. The front door was not in the middle of the house, it was to the end. Undoubtedly, they went the longest way round. But perhaps there was something in the way if one went to the right. A wall, say. He strolled off in that direction, followed a path round the house, and came in sight of the office windows. Quite simple, and about half the distance of the other way. He went on a little farther and came to a door just beyond the broken-in windows. It opened easily, and he found himself in a passage. At the end of the passage was another door. He opened it and found himself in the hall again. And of course, that's the quickest way of the three, he said to himself. Through the hall and out at the back. Turn to the left and there you are. Instead of which, we ran the longest way round the house. Why? Was it to give Mark more time in which to escape? Only in that case, why run? Also, how did Cayley know then that it was Mark who was trying to escape? If he had guessed, well, not guessed, but been afraid, that one had shot the other, it was much more likely that Robert had shot Mark. Indeed, he had admitted that this was what he thought. The first thing he had said when he turned the body over was, "Thank God. I was afraid it was Mark." But why should he want to give Robert time in which to get away? And again, why run if he did want to give him time? Anthony went out of the house again to the lawns at the back and sat down on a bench in view of the office windows. "Now then," he said, "let's go through Cayley's mind carefully and see what we get." Cayley had been in the hall when Robert was shown into the office. The servant goes off to look for Mark, and Cayley goes on with his book. Mark comes down the stairs, warns Cayley to stand by in case he is wanted, and goes to meet his brother. What does Cayley expect? Possibly that he won't be wanted at all. Possibly that his advice may be wanted in the matter, say, of paying Robert's debts, or getting him a passage back to Australia. Possibly that his physical assistance may be wanted to get an obstreperous Robert out of the house. Well, he sits there for a moment and then goes into the library. Why not? He is still within reach, if wanted. Suddenly, he hears a pistol shot. A pistol shot is the last noise you expect to hear in a country house. Very natural, then, that for the moment he would hardly realize what it was. He listens and hears nothing more. Perhaps it wasn't a pistol shot after all. After a moment or two, he goes to the library door again. The profound silence makes him uneasy now. Was it a pistol shot? Absurd. Still, no harm in going into the office on some excuse, just to reassure himself. So he tries the door and finds it locked. What are his emotions now? Alarm, uncertainty. Something is happening. Incredible though it seems, it must have been a pistol shot. He is banging at the door and calling out to Mark, and there is no answer. Alarm, yes, but alarm for whose safety? Mark's, obviously. Robert is a stranger. Mark is an intimate friend. Robert has written a letter that morning, the letter of a man in a dangerous temper. Robert is the tough customer, Mark the highly civilized gentleman. If there has been a quarrel, it is Robert who has shot Mark. He bangs at the door again. Of course, to Anthony, coming suddenly upon this scene, Cayley's conduct had seemed rather absurd. But then, just for the moment, Cayley had lost his head. Anybody else might have done the same. But as soon as Anthony suggested trying the windows, Kaylee saw that that was the obvious thing to do. So he leads the way to the windows, the longest way. Why? To give the murderer time to escape? If he had thought then that Mark was the murderer, perhaps yes. But he thinks that Robert is the murderer. If he is not hiding anything, he must think so. Indeed, he says so when he sees the body. "I was afraid it was Mark," he says, when he finds that it is Robert who is killed. No reason, then, for wishing to gain time. On the contrary, every instinct would urge him to get into the room as quickly as possible and seize the wicked Robert. Yet he goes the longest way round. Why? And then, why run? "That's the question," said Antony to himself as he filled his pipe. "And bless me if I know the answer. It may be, of course, that Kaylee is just a coward. He was in no hurry to get close to Robert's revolver, and yet wanted me to think that he was bursting with eagerness. That would explain it. But then that makes Kaylee out a coward. Is he? At any rate, he pushed his face up against the window bravely enough. No, I want a better answer than that. He sat there with his unlit pipe in his hand, thinking. There were one or two other things in the back of his brain, waiting to be taken out and looked at. For the moment, he left them undisturbed. They would come back to him later, when he wanted them. He laughed suddenly and lit his pipe. "I was wanting a new profession," he thought, "and now I've found it. Antony Gillingham, our own private sleuth hound. I shall begin today." Whatever Antony Gillingham's other qualifications for his new profession, he had at any rate a brain which worked clearly and quickly. And this clear brain of his had already told him that he was the only person in the house at that moment who was unhandicapped in the search for truth. The inspector had arrived in it to find a man dead and a man missing. It was extremely probable, no doubt, that the missing man had shot the dead man. But it was more than extremely probable. It was almost certain that the inspector would start with the idea that this extremely probable solution was the one true solution, and that, in consequence, he would be less disposed to consider without prejudice any other solution. As regards all the rest of them, Kaylee, the guests, the servants, they also were prejudiced, in favor of Mark, or possibly, for all he knew, against Mark, in favor of or against each other. They had formed some previous opinion, from what had been said that morning, of the sort of man Robert was. No one of them could consider the matter with an unbiased mind. But Antony could. He knew nothing about Mark. He knew nothing about Robert. He had seen the dead man before he was told who the dead man was. He knew that a tragedy had happened before he knew that anybody was missing. Those first impressions, which are so vitally important, had been received solely on the merits of the case. They were founded on the evidence of his senses, not on the evidence of his emotions or of other people's senses. He was in a much better position for getting at the truth than was the inspector. It is possible that, in thinking this, Antony was doing Inspector Birch a slight injustice. Birch was certainly prepared to believe that Mark had shot his brother. Robert had been shown into the office, witness Audrey. Mark had gone in to Robert, witness Kaylee. Mark and Robert had been heard talking, witness Elsie. There was a shot, witness everybody. The room had been entered, and Robert's body had been found, witness Kaylee and Gillingham. And Mark was missing. Obviously, then, Mark had killed his brother, accidentally, as Kaylee believed, or deliberately, as Elsie's evidence seemed to suggest. There was no point in looking for a difficult solution to a problem when the easy solution had no flaw in it. But at the same time, Birch would have preferred the difficult solution, simply because there was more credit attached to it. A sensational arrest of somebody in the house would have given him more pleasure than a commonplace pursuit of Mark Ablett across country. Mark must be found, guilty or not guilty. But there were other possibilities. It would have interested Anthony to know that just at the time when he was feeling rather superior to the prejudiced inspector, the inspector himself was letting his mind dwell lovingly upon the possibilities in connection with Mr. Gillingham. Was it only a coincidence that Mr. Gillingham had turned up just when he did? And Mr. Beverley's curious answers when asked for some account of his friend, an assistant in a tobacconist's, a waiter, an odd man, Mr. Gillingham, evidently. It might be as well to keep an eye on him. Chapter 6. Outside or Inside. The guests had said goodbye to Kaylee according to their different manner. The major gruff and simple. If you want me, command me. Anything I can do. Goodbye. Betty, silently sympathetic, with everything in her large eyes which she was too much overawed to tell. Mrs. Calladine, protesting that she did not know what to say, but apparently finding plenty, and Miss Norris, crowding so much into one despairing gesture that Kaylee's unvarying "thank you very much" might have been taken this time as gratitude for an artistic entertainment. Bill had seen them into the car, had taken his own farewells with a special squeeze of the hand for Betty, and had wandered out to join Anthony on his garden seat. "Well, this is a rum show," said Bill as he sat down. "Very rum, William. And you actually walked right into it?" "Right into it," said Anthony. "Then you're the man I want. There are all sorts of rumors and mysteries about, and that inspector fellow simply wouldn't keep to the point when I wanted to ask him about the murder, or whatever it is, but kept asking me questions about where I'd met you first, and all sorts of dull things like that. Now, what really happened?" Anthony told him as concisely as he could all that he had already told the inspector, Bill interrupting him here and there with appropriate good lords and whistles. "I say, it's a bit of a business, isn't it? Where do I come in exactly?" "How do you mean?" "Well, everybody else is bundled off except me, and I get put through it by that inspector as if I knew all about it. What's the idea?" Anthony smiled at him. "Well, there's nothing to worry about, you know. Naturally, Birch wanted to see one of you, so as to know what you'd all been doing all day. And Kaylee was nice enough to think that you'd be company for me, as I knew you already. And, well, that's all." "You're staying here in the house?" said Bill eagerly. "Good man, that's splendid. It reconciles you to the departure of some of the others?" Bill blushed. "Oh, well, I shall see her again next week, anyway," he murmured. "I congratulate you. I liked her looks, and that gray dress. A nice, comfortable sort of woman." "You fool, that's her mother." "Oh, I beg your pardon. But anyhow, Bill, I want you more than she does just now, so try and put up with me." "I say, do you really?" said Bill, rather flattered. He had a great admiration for Anthony, and was very proud to be liked by him. "Yes, you see, things are going to happen here soon. Inquests, and that sort of thing. Well, perhaps something before that." "Hello, here comes Kaylee." Kaylee was walking across the lawn towards them, a big, heavy-shouldered man with one of those strong, clean-shaven, ugly faces, which can never quite be called plain. "Bad luck on Kaylee," said Bill. "I say, ought I to tell him how sorry I am, and all that sort of thing? It seems so dashed inadequate." "I shouldn't bother," said Anthony. Kaylee nodded as he came to them, and stood there for a moment. "We can make room for you," said Bill, getting up. "Oh, don't bother, thanks. I just came to say," he went on to Anthony, "that naturally they've rather lost their heads in the kitchen, and dinner won't be till 8:30. Do just as you like about dressing, of course. And what about your luggage?" "I thought Bill and I would walk over to the inn directly and see about it. The car can go and fetch it as soon as it comes back from the station." "It's very good of you, but I shall have to go over myself, anyhow, to pack up and pay my bill. Besides, it's a good evening for a walk, if you wouldn't mind it, Bill." "I should love it." "Well then, if you leave the bag there, I'll send the car round for it later." "Thanks very much." Having said what he wanted to say, Kaylee remained there a little awkwardly, as if not sure whether to go or to stay. Anthony wondered whether he wanted to talk about the afternoon's happenings, or whether it was the one subject he wished to avoid. To break the silence, he asked carelessly if the inspector had gone. Kaylee nodded. Then he said abruptly, "He's getting a warrant for Mark's arrest." Bill made a suitably sympathetic noise, and Anthony said with a shrug of the shoulders, "Well, he was bound to do that, wasn't he? It doesn't follow that, well, it doesn't mean anything. They naturally want to get hold of your cousin, innocent or guilty." "Which do you think he is, Mr. Gillingham?" said Kaylee, looking at him steadily. "Mark? It's absurd," said Bill impetuously. "Bill's loyal, you see, Mr. Kaylee. And you owe no loyalty to anyone concerned?" "Exactly. So perhaps I might be too frank." Bill had dropped down on the grass, and Kaylee took his place on the seat and sat there heavily, his elbows on his knees, his chin on his hands, gazing at the ground. "I want you to be quite frank," he said at last. "Naturally, I am prejudiced where Mark is concerned, so I want to know how my suggestion strikes you, who have no prejudices either way." "Your suggestion?" "My theory that if Mark killed his brother, it was purely accidental, as I told the inspector." Bill looked up with interest. "You mean that Robert did the hold-up business," he said, "and there was a bit of a struggle, and the revolver went off, and then Mark lost his head and bolted? That sort of idea?" "Exactly. Well, that seems all right." He turned to Anthony. "There's nothing wrong with that, is there? It's the most natural explanation to anyone who knows Mark." Anthony pulled at his pipe. "I suppose it is," he said slowly. "But there's one thing that worries me rather." "What's that?" Bill and Kaylee asked the question simultaneously. "The key." "The key?" said Bill. Kaylee lifted his head and looked at Anthony. "What about the key?" he asked. "Well, there may be nothing in it. I just wondered. Suppose Robert was killed, as you say, and suppose Mark lost his head and thought of nothing but getting away before anyone could see him. Well, very likely he'd lock the door and put the key in his pocket. He'd do it without thinking, just to gain a moment's time. Yes, that's what I suggest." "It seems sound enough," said Bill. "Sort of thing you'd do without thinking. Besides, if you're going to run away, it gives you more of a chance. Yes, that's all right if the key is there, but suppose it isn't there." The suggestion, made as if it were already an established fact, startled them both. They looked at him wonderingly. "What do you mean?" said Kaylee. "Well, it's just a question of where people happen to keep their keys. You go up to your bedroom, and perhaps you like to lock your door in case anybody comes wandering in, when you've only got one sock and a pair of braces on. Well, that's natural enough. And if you look round the bedrooms of almost any house, you'll find the keys all ready so that you can lock yourself in at a moment's notice. But downstairs, people don't lock themselves in. It's really never done at all. Bill, for instance, has never locked himself into the dining room in order to be alone with the sherry. On the other hand, all women, and particularly servants, have a horror of burglars. And if a burglar gets in by the window, they like to limit his activities to that particular room. So they keep the keys on the outside of the doors and lock the doors when they go to bed. He knocked the ashes out of his pipe and added, "At least, my mother always used to." "You mean," said Bill excitedly, "that the key was on the outside of the door when Mark went into the room?" "Well, I was just wondering. Have you noticed the other rooms, the billiard room and library and so on?" said Kaylee. "I've only just thought about it while I've been sitting out here. You live here. Haven't you ever noticed them?" Kaylee sat considering with his head on one side. "It seems rather absurd, you know, but I can't say that I have." He turned to Bill. "Have you?" "Good Lord, no. I should never worry about a thing like that." "I'm sure you wouldn't," laughed Anthony. "Well, we can have a look when we go in. If the other keys are outside, then this one was probably outside too. And in that case, well, it makes it more interesting." Kaylee said nothing. Bill chewed a piece of grass and then said, "Does it make much difference?" "It makes it more hard to understand what happened in there. Take your accidental theory and see where you get to. No instinctive turning of the key now, is there? He's got to open the door to get it. And opening the door means showing his head to anybody in the hall. His cousin, for instance, whom he left there 2 minutes ago. Is a man in Mark's state of mind, frightened to death, lest he should be found with the body, going to do anything so foolhardy as that?" "He needn't have been afraid of me," said Kaylee. "Then why didn't he call for you? He knew you were about. You could have advised him. Heaven knows he wanted advice. But the whole theory of Mark's escape is that he was afraid of you and of everybody else, and that he had no other idea but to get out of the room himself and prevent you or the servants from coming into it. If the key had been on the inside, he would probably have locked the door. If it were on the outside, he almost certainly wouldn't." "Yes, I expect you're right," said Bill thoughtfully, "unless he took the key in with him and locked the door at once." "Exactly. But in that case, you have to build up a new theory entirely. You mean that it makes it seem more deliberate?" "Yes, that, certainly. But it also seems to make Mark out an absolute idiot. Just suppose for a moment that, for urgent reasons which neither of you know anything about, he had wished to get rid of his brother. Would he have done it like that? Just killed him and then run away? Why, that's practically suicide. Suicide whilst of unsound mind. No. If you really wanted to remove an undesirable brother, you would do it a little bit more cleverly than that. You'd begin by treating him as a friend, so as to avoid suspicion, and when you did kill him at last, you would try to make it look like an accident, or suicide, or the work of some other man. Wouldn't you?" "You mean you'd give yourself a bit of a run for your money?" "Yes, that's what I mean. If you were going to do it deliberately, that is to say, and lock yourself in before you began." Kaylee had been silent, apparently thinking over this new idea. With his eyes still on the ground, he said now, "I hold to my opinion that it was purely accidental, and that Mark lost his head and ran away." "But what about the key?" asked Bill. "We don't know yet that the keys were outside." "I don't at all agree with Mr. Gillingham that the keys of the downstairs rooms are always outside the doors. Sometimes they are, no doubt. But I think we shall probably find that these are inside. Oh, well, of course, if they are inside, then your original theory is probably the correct one. Having often seen them outside, I just wondered, that's all. You asked me to be quite frank, and tell you what I thought. But no doubt you're right, and we shall find them inside, as you say. Even if the key was outside, went on Kaylee stubbornly, I still think it might have been accidental. He might have taken it in with him, knowing that the interview would be an unpleasant one, and not wishing to be interrupted. But he had just told you to stand by in case he wanted you. So why should he lock you out? Besides, I should think that if a man were going to have an unpleasant interview with a threatening relation, the last thing he would do would be to barricade himself in with him. He would want to open all the doors and say, "Get out of it." Kaylee was silent, but his mouth looked obstinate. Anthony gave a little apologetic laugh and stood up. "Well, come on, Bill," he said. "We ought to be stepping." He held out a hand and pulled his friend up. Then turning to Kaylee, he went on, "You must forgive me if I have let my thoughts run on rather. Of course, I was considering the matter purely as an outsider, just as a problem, I mean, which didn't concern the happiness of any of my friends." "That's all right, Mr. Gillingham," said Kaylee, standing up too. "It is for you to make allowances for me. I'm sure you will. You say that you're going up to the inn now about your bag?" "Yes." He looked up at the sun and then round the parkland stretching about the house. "Let me see. It's over in that direction, isn't it?" He pointed southwards. "Can we get to the village that way, or must we go by the road?" "I'll show you, my boy," said Bill. "Bill will show you. The park reaches almost as far as the village. Then I'll send the car round in about half an hour." "Thanks very much." Kaylee nodded and turned to go into the house. Anthony took hold of Bill's arm and walked off with him in the opposite direction. Chapter 7. Portrait of a Gentleman. They walked in silence for a little, until they had left the house and gardens well behind them. In front of them, and to the right, the park dipped and then rose slowly, shutting out the rest of the world. A thick belt of trees on the left divided them from the main road. "Ever been here before?" said Anthony suddenly. "Oh, rather. Dozens of times." "I meant just here, where we are now. Or do you stay indoors and play billiards all the time?" "Oh, Lord, no. Well, tennis and things. So many people with beautiful parks never by any chance use them. And all the poor devils passing by on the dusty road think how lucky the owners are to have them, and imagine them doing all sorts of jolly things inside." He pointed to the right. "Ever been over there?" Bill laughed as if a little ashamed. "Well, not very much. I've often been along here, of course, because it's the short way to the village." "Yes. All right. Now tell me something about Mark." "What sort of things?" "Well, never mind about his being your host, or about your being a perfect gentleman, or anything like that. Cut out the manners for men, and tell me what you think of Mark, and how you like staying with him, and how many rows your little house party has had this week, and how you get on with Kaylee, and all the rest of it." Bill looked at him eagerly. "I say, are you being the complete detective?" "Well, I wanted a new profession," smiled the other. "What fun! I mean," he corrected himself apologetically, "one oughtn't to say that when there's a man dead in the house and one's host." He broke off a little uncertainly, and then rounded off his period by saying again, "By Jove, what a rum show it is! Good Lord!" "Well," said Anthony, "carry on, Mark. What do I think of him?" Bill was silent. wondering how to put into words thoughts which had never formed themselves very definitely in his own mind. What did he think of Mark? Seeing his hesitation, Antony said, "I ought to have warned you that nothing that you say will be taken down by the reporters, so you needn't bother about a split infinitive or two. Talk about anything you like, how you like. Well, I'll give you a start. Which do you enjoy more, a weekend here or at the Barringtons, say?" "Well, of course, that would depend. Take it that she was there in both cases." "Ass," said Bill, putting an elbow into Antony's ribs. "It's a little difficult to say," he went on. "Of course they do you awfully well here. Yes, I don't think I know any house where things are so comfortable. One's room, the food, drinks, cigars, the way everything's arranged, all that sort of thing. They look after you awfully well, yes?" "Yes." He repeated it slowly to himself, as if it had given him a new idea. "They look after you awfully well. Well, that's just what it is about Mark. That's one of his little ways, weaknesses. Looking after you. Arranging things for you? Yes, of course, it's a delightful house, and there's plenty to do, and opportunities for every game or sport that's ever been invented, and, as I say, one gets awfully well done. But with it all, Tony, there's a faint sort of feeling that, well, that one is on parade, as it were. You've got to do as you're told." "How do you mean?" "Well, Mark fancies himself rather at arranging things. He arranges things, and it's understood that the guests fall in with the arrangement. For instance, Betty, Miss Calladine, and I were going to play a single just before tea the other day. Tennis. She's frightfully hot stuff at tennis, and backed herself to take me on level. I'm rather erratic, you know." Mark saw us going out with our rackets and asked us what we were going to do. Well, he'd got up a little tournament for us after tea, handicaps all arranged by him, and everything ruled out neatly in red and black ink, prizes and all. Quite decent ones, you know. He'd had the lawn specially cut and marked for it. Well, of course Betty and I wouldn't have spoilt the court, and we'd have been quite ready to play again after tea. I had to give her half 15 according to his handicap, but somehow— Bill stopped and shrugged his shoulders. "It didn't quite fit in?" "No, it spoilt the effect of his tournament. Took the edge off it just a little, I suppose he felt. So we didn't play." He laughed and added, "It would have been as much as our place was worth to have played." "Do you mean you wouldn't have been asked here again?" "Probably. Well, I don't know. Not for some time, anyway." "Really, Bill?" "Oh, rather. He's a devil for taking offense. That Miss Norris, did you see her? She's done for herself. I don't mind betting what you like that she never comes here again." "Why?" Bill laughed to himself. "We were all in it, really. At least Betty and I were. There's supposed to be a ghost attached to the house, Lady Ann Patten. Ever heard of her?" "Never. Mark told us about her at dinner one night. He rather liked the idea of there being a ghost in his house. You know, except that he doesn't believe in ghosts. I think he wanted all of us to believe in her, and yet he was annoyed with Betty and Mrs. Calladine for believing in ghosts at all. Rum chap. Well, anyhow, Miss Norris, she's an actress, some actress too, dressed up as the ghost and played the fool a bit. And poor Mark was frightened out of his life. Just for a moment, you know." "What about the others?" "Well, Betty and I knew. In fact, I told her, Miss Norris, I mean, not to be a silly ass. Knowing Mark. Mrs. Calladine wasn't there. Betty wouldn't let her be. As for the Major, I don't believe anything would frighten him." "Where did the ghost appear?" Down by the bowling green. That's supposed to be its haunt, you know? We were all down there in the moonlight, pretending to wait for it. Do you know the bowling green? No. I'll show it to you after dinner. I wish you would. Was Mark very angry afterwards? Oh, Lord, yes. Sulked for a whole day. Well, he's just like that. Was he angry with all of you? Oh, yes, sulky, you know. This morning? Oh, no, he got over it. He generally does. He's just like a child. That's really it, Tony. He's like a child in some ways. As a matter of fact, he was unusually bucked with himself this morning. And yesterday. Yesterday. Rather. We all said we'd never seen him in such form. Is he generally in form? He's quite good company, you know, if you take him the right way. He's rather vain and childish, well, like I've been telling you, and self-important, but quite amusing in his way, and… Bill broke off suddenly. I say, you know, it really is the limit, talking about your host like this. Don't think of him as your host. Think of him as a suspected murderer with a warrant out against him. Oh, but that's all rot, you know. It's the fact, Bill. Yes, but I mean, he didn't do it. He wouldn't murder anybody. It's a funny thing to say, but, well, he's not big enough for it. He's got his faults like all of us, but they aren't on that scale. One can kill anybody in a childish fit of temper. Bill grunted assent, but without prejudice to Mark. All the same, he said, I can't believe it. That he would do it deliberately, I mean. Suppose it was an accident, as Kaylee says. Would he lose his head and run away? Bill considered for a moment. Yes, I really think he might, you know. He nearly ran away when he saw the ghost. Of course, that's different, rather. Oh, I don't know. In each case, it's a question of obeying your instinct instead of your reason. They had left the open land and were following a path through the bordering trees. To nest was uncomfortable, so Anthony dropped behind, and further conversation was postponed until they were outside the boundary fence and in the high road. The road sloped gently down to the village of Woodham, a few red-roofed cottages, and the gray tower of a church showing above the green. Well now, said Anthony as they stepped out more quickly. What about Kaylee? How do you mean, what about him? I want to see him. I can see Mark perfectly, thanks to you, Bill. You were wonderful. Now let's have Kaylee's character. Kaylee from within. Bill laughed in pleased embarrassment and protested that he was not a blooming novelist. Besides, he added, Mark's easy. Kaylee's one of these heavy, quiet people who might be thinking about anything. Mark gives himself away. Ugly, black-jawed devil, isn't he? Some women like that type of ugliness. Yes, that's true. Between ourselves, I think there's one here who does. Rather a pretty girl at Jallan's. He waved his left hand. Down that way. What's Jallan's? Well, I suppose it used to be a farm, belonging to a bloke called Jalland. But now, it's a country cottage belonging to a widow called Norbury. Mark and Kaylee used to go there a good deal together. Miss Norbury, the girl, has been here once or twice for tennis. Seemed to prefer Kaylee to the rest of us. But of course he hadn't much time for that sort of thing. What sort of thing? Walking about with a pretty girl and asking her if she's been to any theaters lately. He nearly always had something to do. Mark kept him busy? Yes, Mark never seemed quite happy unless he had Kaylee doing something for him. He was quite lost and helpless without him. And funnily enough, Kaylee seemed lost without Mark. He was fond of him? Yes, I should say so, in a protective kind of way. He'd sized Mark up, of course. His vanity, his self-importance, his amateurishness, and all the rest of it. But he liked looking after him, and he knew how to manage him. Yes. What sort of terms was he on with the guests, you and Miss Norris and all of them? Just polite and rather silent. you know? Keeping himself to himself. We didn't see so very much of him, except at meals. We were here to enjoy ourselves, and well, he wasn't. He wasn't there when the ghost walked. No, I heard Mark calling for him when he went back to the house. I expect Kaylee stroked down his feathers a bit and told him that girls will be girls. Hello, here we are. They went into the inn, and while Bill made himself pleasant to the landlady, Anthony went upstairs to his room. It appeared that he had not very much packing to do after all. He returned his brushes to his bag, glanced round to see that nothing else had been taken out, and went down again to settle his bill. He had decided to keep on his room for a few days, partly to save the landlord and his wife the disappointment of losing a guest so suddenly, partly in case he found it undesirable later on to remain at the Red House, for he was taking himself seriously as a detective. Indeed, he took himself seriously while getting all the fun out of it which was possible at every new profession he adopted. And he felt that there might come a time, after the inquest, say when he could not decently remain at the Red House as a guest, a friend of Bill's, enjoying the hospitality of Mark or Kaylee, whichever was to be regarded as his host, without forfeiting his independent attitude towards the events of that afternoon. At present he was staying in the house merely as a necessary witness, and since he was there, Kaylee could not object to him using his eyes. But if, after the inquest, it appeared that there was still work for a pair of independent and very keen eyes to do, then he must investigate, either with his host's approval or from beneath the roof of some other host, the landlord of the George, for instance, who had no feelings in the matter. For of one thing Anthony was certain: Kaylee knew more than he professed to know. That is to say, he knew more than he wanted other people to know he knew. Anthony was one of the other people. If therefore he was for trying to find out what it was that Kaylee knew, he could hardly expect Kaylee's approval of his labors. It would be the George, then, for Anthony after the inquest. What was the truth? Not necessarily discreditable to Kaylee, even though he were hiding something. All that could be said against him at the moment was that he had gone the longest way round to get into the locked office, and that this did not fit in with what he had told the inspector, but it did fit in with the theory that he had been an accessory after the event, and that he wanted, while appearing to be in a hurry, to give his cousin as much time as possible in which to escape. That might not be the true solution, but it was at least a workable one. The theory which he had suggested to the inspector was not. However, there would be a day or two before the inquest in which Anthony could consider all these matters from within the Red House. The car was at the door. He got in with Bill. The landlord put his bag on the front seat next to the chauffeur, and they drove back. Chapter 8. Do you follow me, Watson? Anthony's bedroom looked over the park at the back of the house. The blinds were not yet drawn while he was changing his clothes for dinner, and at various stages of undress he would pause and gaze out of the window, sometimes smiling to himself, sometimes frowning, as he turned over in his mind all the strange things that he had seen that day. He was sitting on his bed, in shirt and trousers, absently smoothing down his thick black hair with his brushes, when Bill shouted an "hello" through the door, and came in. "I say, buck up, old boy, I'm hungry," he said. Anthony stopped smoothing himself and looked up at him thoughtfully. "Where's Mark?" he said. "Mark, you mean Kaylee," Anthony corrected himself with a little laugh. "Yes, I mean Kaylee. Is he down? I say, I shan't be a moment, Bill." He got up from the bed and went on briskly with his dressing. "Oh, by the way," said Bill, taking his place on the bed, "your idea about the keys is a washout." "Why? How do you mean?" "I went down just now and had a look at them. We were asses not to have thought of it when we came in. The library key is outside, but all the others are inside." "Yes, I know." "You devil, I suppose you did think of it then." "I did, Bill," said Anthony, apologetically. "Bother, I hoped you'd forgotten. Well, that knocks your theory on the head, doesn't it?" "I never had a theory. I only said that if they were outside, it would probably mean that the office key was outside, and that in that case, Kaylee's theory was knocked on the head." "Well, now, it isn't, and we don't know anything. Some were outside and some inside, and there you are. It makes it much less exciting. When you were talking about it on the lawn, I really got quite keen on the idea of the key being outside and Mark taking it in with him." "It's going to be exciting enough," said Anthony mildly, as he transferred his pipe and tobacco into the pocket of his black coat. "Well, let's come down. I'm ready now." Kaylee was waiting for them in the hall. He made some polite inquiry as to the guests' comfort, and the three of them fell into a casual conversation about houses in general, and the Red House in particular. "You were quite right about the keys," said Bill, during a pause. "He was less able than the other two, perhaps because he was younger than they, to keep away from the subject which was uppermost in the minds of them all." "Keys?" said Kaylee blankly. "We were wondering whether they were outside or inside." Oh, yes!" He looked slowly round the hall, at the different doors, and then smiled in a friendly way at Anthony. "We both seem to have been right, Mr. Gillingham, so we don't get much farther." "No," he gave a shrug. "I just wondered, you know. I thought it was worth mentioning." "Oh, quite. Not that you would have convinced me, you know. Just as Elsie's evidence doesn't convince me." "Elsie?" said Bill excitedly. Anthony looked inquiringly at him, wondering who Elsie was. "One of the housemaids," explained Kaylee. "You didn't hear what she told the inspector?" "Of course. As I told Birch, girls of that class make things up. But he seemed to think she was genuine." "What was it?" said Bill. Kaylee told them of what Elsie had heard through the office door that afternoon. "You were in the library then, of course," said Anthony, rather to himself than to the other. "She might have gone through the hall without your hearing." "Oh, I've no doubt she was there, and heard voices. Perhaps heard those very words. But," he broke off, and then added impatiently, "it was accidental. I know it was accidental. What's the good of talking as if Mark was a murderer?" Dinner was announced at that moment, and as they went in, he added, "What's the good of talking about it at all, if it comes to that?" "What indeed?" said Anthony, and to Bill's great disappointment, they talked of books and politics during the meal. Kaylee made an excuse for leaving them as soon as their cigars were alight. He had business to attend to, as was natural. Bill would look after his friend. Bill was only too willing. He offered to beat Anthony at billiards, to play him at piquet, to show him the garden by moonlight, or indeed to do anything else with him that he required. "Thank the Lord you're here," he said piously. "I couldn't have stood it alone." "Let's go outside," suggested Anthony. "It's quite warm. Somewhere where we can sit down, right away from the house. I want to talk to you." "Good man. What about the bowling green?" "Oh, you were going to show me that anyhow, weren't you? Is it somewhere where we can talk without being overheard?" "Rather. The ideal place. You'll see." They came out of the front door and followed the drive to the left. Coming from Woodham, Anthony had approached the house that afternoon from the other side. The way they were going now would take them out at the opposite end of the park, on the high road to Stanton, a country town some 3 miles away. They passed by a gate and a gardener's lodge. which marked the limit of what auctioneers like to call the ornamental grounds of the estate, and then the open park was before them. "Sure we haven't missed it?" said Anthony. The park lay quietly in the moonlight on either side of the drive, wearing a little way ahead of them a deceptive air of smoothness which retreated always as they advanced. "Rum, isn't it?" said Bill. "An absurd place for a bowling green, but I suppose it was always here." "Yes, but always where? It's short enough for golf, perhaps, but—" Hello! They had come to the place. The road bent round to the right, but they kept straight on over a broad grass path for 20 yards, and there in front of them was the green. A dry ditch, 10 feet wide and 6 feet deep, surrounded it, except in the one place where the path went forward. 2 or 3 grass steps led down to the green, on which there was a long wooden bench for the benefit of spectators. "Yes, it hides itself very nicely," said Anthony. "Where do you keep the bowls?" "In a sort of summer-house place, round here." They walked along the edge of the green until they came to it, a low wooden bunk which had been built into one wall of the ditch. Jolly view." Bill laughed. "Nobody sits there. It's just for keeping things out of the rain." They finished their circuit of the green, "just in case anybody's in the ditch," said Anthony, and then sat down on the bench. "Now then," said Bill, "we're alone. Fire ahead." Anthony smoked thoughtfully for a little. Then he took his pipe out of his mouth and turned to his friend. "Are you prepared to be the complete Watson?" he asked. "Watson? Do you follow me, Watson? That one. Are you prepared to have quite obvious things explained to you? To ask futile questions? To give me chances of scoring off you? To make brilliant discoveries of your own 2 or 3 days after I have made them myself? All that kind of thing? Because it all helps." "My dear Tony," said Bill delightedly, "need you ask?" Anthony said nothing, and Bill went on happily to himself. "I perceive from the strawberry mark on your shirt front that you had strawberries for dessert. Holmes, you astonish me. Tut, tut, you know my methods. Where is the tobacco?" "The tobacco is in the Persian slipper. Can I leave my practice for a week?" "I can." Anthony smiled and went on smoking. After waiting hopefully for a minute or two, Bill said in a firm voice, "Well then, Holmes, I feel bound to ask you if you have deduced anything. Also, whom do you suspect?" Anthony began to talk. "Do you remember," he said, "one of Holmes's little scores over Watson about the number of steps up to the Baker Street lodging? Poor old Watson had been up and down them 1,000 times, but he had never thought of counting them, whereas Holmes had counted them as a matter of course and knew that there were 17, and that was supposed to be the difference between observation and non-observation. Watson was crushed again, and Holmes appeared to him more amazing than ever. Now, it always seemed to me that in that matter, Holmes was the ass, and Watson the sensible person. What on earth is the point of keeping in your head an unnecessary fact like that? If you really want to know at any time the number of steps to your lodging, you can ring up your landlady and ask her. I've been up and down the steps of the club 1,000 times. But if you really wanted to know," said Anthony casually, with a sudden change of voice, "I could find out for you without even bothering to ring up the hall porter." Bill was puzzled as to why they were talking about the club steps, but he felt it his duty to say that he did want to know how many they were. "Right," said Anthony. "I'll find out." He closed his eyes. "I'm walking up St. James Street," he said slowly. "Now I've come to the club, and I'm going past the smoking room. Windows, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm at the steps. I turn in and begin going up them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then a broad step. 6, 7, 8, 9. Another broad step. 9, 10, 11. 11. I'm inside. Good morning, Rogers. Fine day again. With a little start, he opened his eyes and came back again to his present surroundings. He turned to Bill with a smile. 11, he said. Count them the next time you're there. 11, and now I hope I shall forget it again. Bill was distinctly interested. That's rather hot, he said. Expound. Well, I can't explain it. Whether it's something in the actual eye, or something in the brain, or what, but I have got rather an uncanny habit of recording things unconsciously. You know that game where you look at a tray full of small objects for 3 minutes and then turn away and try to make a list of them? It means a devil of a lot of concentration for the ordinary person, if he wants to get his list complete. But in some odd way, I manage to do it without concentration at all. I mean that my eyes seem to do it without the brain consciously taking any part. I could look at the tray, for instance, and talk to you about golf at the same time and still get my list right. I should think that's rather a useful gift for an amateur detective. You ought to have gone into the profession before. Well, it is rather useful. It's rather surprising, you know, to a stranger. Let's surprise Cayley with it, shall we? How? Well, let's ask him. Anthony stopped and looked at Bill comically. Let's ask him what he's going to do with the key of the office. For a moment, Bill did not understand. Key of the office? He said vaguely. You don't mean, Tony, what do you mean? Good God, do you mean that Cayley? But what about Mark? I don't know where Mark is. That's another thing I want to know. But I'm quite certain that he hasn't got the key of the office with him, because Cayley's got it. Are you sure? Quite. Bill looked at him wonderingly. I say, he said, almost pleadingly, don't tell me that you can see into people's pockets and all that sort of thing as well. Anthony laughed and denied it cheerfully. Then how do you know? You're the perfect Watson, Bill. You take to it quite naturally. Properly speaking, I oughtn't to explain till the last chapter, but I always think that that's so unfair. So here goes. Of course, I don't really know that he's got it, but I do know that he had it. I know that when I came on him this afternoon, he had just locked the door and put the key in his pocket. You mean you saw him at the time, but that you've only just remembered it, reconstructed it, in the way you were explaining just now? No, I didn't see him, but I did see something. I saw the key of the billiard room. Where? Outside the billiard room door. Outside? But it was inside when we looked just now. Exactly. Who put it there? Obviously, Cayley. But let's go back to this afternoon. I don't remember noticing the billiard room key at the time. I must have done so without knowing. Probably when I saw Cayley banging at the door, I may have wondered subconsciously whether the key of the room next to it would fit. Something like that, I dare say. Well, when I was sitting out by myself on that seat just before you came along, I went over the whole scene in my mind, and I suddenly saw the billiard room key there, outside, and I began to wonder if the office key had been outside too. When Cayley came up, I told you my idea, and you were both interested. But Cayley was just a shade too interested. I dare say you didn't notice it, but he was. By Jove! Well, of course, that proved nothing. And the key business didn't really prove anything, because whatever side of the door the other keys were, Mark might have locked his own private room from the inside sometimes. But I piled it on and pretended that it was enormously important, and quite altered the case altogether. And having got Kaylee thoroughly anxious about it, I told him that we should be well out of the way for the next hour or so, and that he would be alone in the house to do what he liked about it. And as I expected, he couldn't resist it. He altered the keys and gave himself away entirely. But the library key was still outside. Why didn't he alter that? Because he's a clever devil. For one thing, the inspector had been in the library and might possibly have noticed it already. And for another, Anthony hesitated. "What?" said Bill, after waiting for him to go on. "It's only guesswork, but I fancy that Kaylee was thoroughly upset about the key business. He suddenly realized that he had been careless and he hadn't got time to think it all over. So he didn't want to commit himself definitely to the statement that the key was either outside or inside. He wanted to leave it vague. It was safest that way." "I see," said Bill slowly, but his mind was elsewhere. He was wondering suddenly about Kaylee. Kaylee was just an ordinary man, like himself. Bill had had little jokes with him sometimes. Not that Kaylee was much of a hand at joking. Bill had helped him to sausages, played tennis with him, borrowed his tobacco, lent him a putter, and here was Anthony saying that he was, what? Well, not an ordinary man anyway. A man with a secret. Perhaps a murderer? No, not a murderer. Not Kaylee. That was rot anyway. Why, they had played tennis together. "Stop. Now then, Watson," said Anthony suddenly. "It's time you said something." "I say, Tony, do you really mean it?" "Mean what?" "About Kaylee." "I mean what I said, Bill. No more." "Well, what does it amount to?" "Simply that Robert Abelette died in the office this afternoon, and that Kaylee knows exactly how he died. That's all. It doesn't follow that Kaylee killed him." "No, of course it doesn't." Bill gave a sigh of relief. "He's just shielding Mark, what?" "I wonder." "Well, isn't that the simplest explanation?" "It's the simplest if you're a friend of Kaylee and want to let him down lightly. But then, I'm not, you see." "Why isn't it simple, anyhow?" "Well, let's have the explanation then, and I'll undertake to give you a simpler one afterwards. Go on. Only remember, the key is on the outside of the door to start with." "Yes, well, I don't mind that." Mark goes in to see his brother, and they quarrel and all the rest of it, just as Kaylee was saying. Kaylee hears the shot, and in order to give Mark time to get away, locks the door, puts the key in his pocket, and pretends that Mark has locked the door, and that he can't get in. How's that? Hopeless, Watson, hopeless. Why? How does Kaylee know that it is Mark who has shot Robert, and not the other way round? "Oh," said Bill, rather upset. "Yes." He thought for a moment. "All right. Say that Kaylee has gone into the room first, and seen Robert on the ground. Well? Well, there you are. And what does he say to Mark? That it's a fine afternoon, and could he lend him a pocket handkerchief? Or does he ask him what's happened?" "Well, of course, I suppose he asks what happened," said Bill reluctantly. "And what does Mark say?" "Explains that the revolver went off accidentally during a struggle, whereupon Kaylee shields him by doing what, Bill? Encouraging him to do the damn silliest thing that any man could possibly do, confess his guilt by running away." "No." "That's rather hopeless, isn't it?" Bill thought again. "Well," he said reluctantly, "suppose Mark confessed that he'd murdered his brother. That's better, Bill. Don't be afraid of getting away from the accident idea. Well then, Your new theory is this. Mark confesses to Kaylee that he shot Robert on purpose, and Kaylee decides, even at the risk of committing perjury and getting into trouble himself, to help Mark to escape. Is that right? Bill nodded. Well then, I want to ask you two questions. First, is it possible, as I said before dinner, that any man would commit such an idiotic murder, a murder that puts the rope so very tightly round his neck? Secondly, if Kaylee is prepared to perjure himself for Mark, as he has to anyway now, wouldn't it be simpler for him to say that he was in the office all the time, and that Robert's death was accidental? Bill considered this carefully, and then nodded slowly again. Yes, my simple explanation is a washout, he said. Now let's have yours. Antony did not answer him. He had begun to think about something quite different. Chapter 9. Possibilities of a croquet set. What's the matter? Said Bill sharply. Antony looked round at him with raised eyebrows. You've thought of something suddenly, said Bill. What is it? Antony laughed. My dear Watson, he said, you aren't supposed to be as clever as this. Oh, you can't take me in. No. Well, I was wondering about this ghost of yours, Bill. It seems to me, oh that! Bill was profoundly disappointed. What on earth has the ghost got to do with it? I don't know, said Antony apologetically. I don't know what anything has got to do with it. I was just wondering. You shouldn't have brought me here if you hadn't wanted me to think about the ghost. This is where she appeared, isn't it? Yes. Bill was distinctly short about it. How? What? I said how. How do ghosts appear? I don't know. They just appear. Over 400 or 500 yards of open park? Well, but she had to appear here, because this is where the original one, Lady Anne, you know, was supposed to walk. Oh, never mind Lady Anne. A real ghost can do anything. But how did Miss Norris appear suddenly, over 500 yards of bare park? Bill looked at Antony with open mouth. I don't know, he stammered. We never thought of that. You would have seen her long before, wouldn't you, if she had come the way we came? Of course we should. And that would have spoilt it, rather. You would have had time to recognize her walk. Bill was interested now. That's rather funny, you know, Tony. We none of us thought of that. You're sure she didn't come across the park when none of you were looking? Quite. Because you see, Betty and I were expecting her. And we kept looking round in case we saw her, so that we should all be playing with our backs to her. You and Miss Calladine were playing together? I say, however do you know that? Brilliant deductive reasoning. Well, then you suddenly saw her? Yes, she walked across that side of the lawn. He indicated the opposite side, nearer to the house. She couldn't have been hiding in the ditch. Do you call it the moat, by the way? Mark does. We don't among ourselves. No, she couldn't. Betty and I were here before the others and walked round a bit. We should have seen her. Then she must have been hiding in the shed. Or do you call it the summer house? We had to go there for the bowls, of course. She couldn't have been there. Oh, it's dashed funny, said Bill, after an interval for thought. But it doesn't matter, does it? It has nothing to do with Robert. Hasn't it? I say, has it? Said Bill, getting excited again. I don't know. We don't know what has, or what hasn't. But it has got something to do with Miss Norris. And Miss Norris. He broke off suddenly. What about her? Well, you're all in it, in a kind of way. And if something unaccountable happens to one of you, a day or two before something unaccountable happens to the whole house, one is, well, interested. It was a good enough reason, but it wasn't the reason he had been on the point of giving. I see. Well, Antony knocked out his pipe and got up slowly. Well then, let's find the way from the house by which Miss Norris came. Bill jumped up eagerly. By Jove, do you mean there's a secret passage? A secluded passage, anyway. There must be. I say, what fun! I love secret passages. Good Lord! And this afternoon, I was playing golf, just like an ordinary merchant. What a life! Secret passages. They made their way down into the ditch. If an opening was to be found which led to the house, it would probably be on the house side of the green, and on the outside of the ditch. The most obvious place at which to begin the search was the shed where the bowls were kept. It was a tidy place, as anything in Mark's establishment would be. There were 2 boxes of croquet things, one of them with the lid open, as if the balls and mallets and hoops, neatly enough put away though, had been recently used. A box of bowls, a small lawnmower, a roller, and so forth. A seat ran along the back of it, whereon the bowls players could sit when it rained. Anthony tapped the wall at the back. This is where the passage ought to begin. It doesn't sound very hollow, does it? It needn't begin here at all, need it? Said Bill, walking round with bent head and tapping the other walls. He was just too tall to stand upright in the shed. There's only one reason why it should, and that is that it would save us the trouble of looking anywhere else for it. Surely Mark didn't let you play croquet on his bowling green? He pointed to the croquet things. He didn't encourage it at one time, but this year he got rather keen about it. There's really nowhere else to play. Personally, I hate the game. He wasn't very keen on bowls, you know, but he liked calling it the bowling green and surprising his visitors with it. Anthony laughed. I love you on Mark, he said. You're priceless. He began to feel in his pockets for his pipe and tobacco, and then suddenly stopped and stiffened to attention. For a moment he stood listening, with his head on one side, holding up a finger to bid Bill listen too. What is it? Whispered Bill. Anthony waved him to silence and remained listening. Very quietly, he went down on his knees and listened again. Then he put his ear to the floor. He got up and dusted himself quickly, walked across to Bill, and whispered in his ear, Footsteps! Somebody coming! When I begin to talk, back me up. Bill nodded. Anthony gave him an encouraging pat on the back and stepped firmly across to the box of bowls, whistling loudly to himself. He took the bowls out, dropped one with a loud bang on the floor, said, Oh, Lord, and went on. I say, Bill, I don't think I want to play bowls after all. Well, why did you say you did? Grumbled Bill. Anthony flashed a smile of appreciation at him. Well, I wanted to when I said I did, and now I don't want to. Then what do you want to do? Talk. Oh, right-o, said Bill eagerly. There's a seat on the lawn. I saw it. Let's bring these things along in case we want to play after all. Right-o, said Bill again. He felt safe with that, not wishing to commit himself until he knew what he was wanted to say. As they went across the lawn, Anthony dropped the bowls and took out his pipe. Got a match? He said loudly. As he bent his head over the match, he whispered, There'll be somebody listening to us. You take the Cayley view. And then went on in his ordinary voice. I don't think much of your matches, Bill, and struck another. They walked over to the seat and sat down. What a heavenly night, said Anthony. Ripping. I wonder where that poor devil Mark is now. It's a rum business. You agree with Cayley that it was an accident? Yes. You see, I know Mark. Anthony produced a pencil and a piece of paper and began to write on his knee. But while he wrote, he talked. He said that he thought Mark had shot his brother in a fit of anger, and that Cayley knew, or anyhow guessed, this and had tried to give his cousin a chance of getting away. Mind you, I think he's right. I think it's what any of us would do. I shan't give it away, of course. But somehow, there are one or two little things which make me think that Mark really did shoot his brother. I mean, other than accidentally. Murdered him. Well, manslaughtered him anyway. I may be wrong. Anyway, it's not my business. But why do you think so? Because of the keys? Oh, the keys are a washout. Still, it was a brilliant idea of mine, wasn't it? And it would have been rather a score for me if they had all been outside. He had finished his writing, and now passed the paper over to Bill. In the clear moonlight, the carefully printed letters could easily be read. Go on talking as if I were here. After a minute or two, turn round as if I were sitting on the grass behind you, but go on talking. I know you don't agree with me, Anthony went on as Bill read, but you'll see that I'm right. Bill looked up and nodded eagerly. He had forgotten golf and Betty and all the other things which had made up his world lately. This was the real thing. This was life. Well, he began deliberately. The whole point is that I know Mark. Now, Mark. But Anthony was off the seat and letting himself gently down into the ditch. His intention was to crawl round it until the shed came in sight. The footsteps which he had heard seemed to be underneath the shed. Probably there was a trapdoor of some kind in the floor. Whoever it was would have heard their voices and would probably think it worthwhile to listen to what they were saying. He might do this merely by opening the door a little without showing himself, in which case Anthony would have found the entrance to the passage without any trouble to himself. But when Bill turned his head and talked over the back of the seat, it was probable that the listener would find it necessary to put his head outside in order to hear, and then Anthony would be able to discover who it was. Moreover, if he should venture out of his hiding place altogether and peep at them over the top of the bank, the fact that Bill was talking over the back of the seat would mislead the watcher into thinking that Anthony was still there, sitting on the grass, no doubt behind the seat, swinging his legs over the side of the ditch. He walked quickly, but very silently, along the half-length of the bowling green to the first corner, passed cautiously round, and then went even more carefully along the width of it to the second corner. He could hear Bill hard at it, arguing from his knowledge of Mark's character that this, that, and the other must have happened, and he smiled appreciatively to himself. Bill was a great conspirator worth 100 Watsons. As he approached the second corner, he slowed down and did the last few yards on hands and knees. Then, lying at full length, inch by inch, his head went round the corner. The shed was 2 or 3 yards to his left, on the opposite side of the ditch. From where he lay, he could see almost entirely inside it. Everything seemed to be as they left it. The bowls box, the lawnmower, the roller, the open croquet box. By Jove, said Anthony to himself, that's neat. The lid of the other croquet box was open too. Bill was turning round now. His voice became more difficult to hear. You see what I mean, he was saying. If Kaylee, and out of the second croquet box came Kaylee's black head. Anthony wanted to shout his applause. It was neat, devilish neat. For a moment he gazed, fascinated, at that wonderful new kind of croquet ball, which had appeared so dramatically out of the box, and then reluctantly wriggled himself back. There was nothing to be gained by staying there, and a good deal to be lost, for Bill showed signs of running down. As quickly as he could, Antony hurried round the ditch and took up his place at the back of the seat. Then he stood up with a yawn, stretched himself, and said carelessly, "Well, don't worry yourself about it, Bill, old man. I dare say you're right. You know Mark, and I don't. And that's the difference. Shall we have a game, or shall we go to bed?" Bill looked at him for inspiration, and, receiving it, said, "Oh, just let's have one game, shall we?" "Right you are," said Antony. But Bill was much too excited to take the game which followed very seriously. Antony, on the other hand, seemed to be thinking of nothing but bowls. He played with great deliberation for 10 minutes, and then announced that he was going to bed. Bill looked at him anxiously. "It's all right," laughed Antony. "You can talk if you want to. Just let's put 'em away first, though." They made their way down to the shed, and while Bill was putting the bowls away, Antony tried the lid of the closed croquet box. As he expected, it was locked. "Now then," said Bill, as they were walking back to the house again, "I'm simply bursting to know, who was it?" "Kaylee." "Good Lord! Where?" "Inside one of the croquet boxes." "Don't be an ass." "It's quite true, Bill." He told the other what he had seen. "But aren't we going to have a look at it?" asked Bill in great disappointment. "I'm longing to explore, aren't you? Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. We shall see Kaylee coming along this way directly. Besides, I want to get in from the other end, if I can. I doubt very much if we can do it this end without giving ourselves away. Look, there's Kaylee." They could see him coming along the drive towards them. When they were a little closer, they waved to him, and he waved back. "I wondered where you were," he said as he got up to them. "I rather thought you might be along this way. What about bed?" "Bed it is," said Antony. "We've been playing bowls," added Bill, "and talking, and playing bowls. Ripping night, isn't it?" But he left the rest of the conversation, as they wandered back to the house, to Antony. He wanted to think. There seemed to be no doubt now that Kaylee was a villain. Bill had never been familiar with a villain before. It didn't seem quite fair of Kaylee, somehow. He was taking rather a mean advantage of his friends. Lot of funny people there were in the world. Funny people with secrets. Look at Tony. That first time he had met him in a tobacconist's shop. Anybody would have thought he was a tobacconist's assistant. And Kaylee. Anybody would have thought that Kaylee was an ordinary, decent sort of person. And Mark. Dash it, one could never be sure of anybody. Now Robert was different. Everybody had always said that Robert was a shady fellow. But what on earth had Miss Norris got to do with it? What had Miss Norris got to do with it? This was a question which Antony had already asked himself that afternoon, and it seemed to him now that he had found the answer. As he lay in bed that night, he reassembled his ideas and looked at them in the new light which the events of the evening threw upon the dark corners in his brain. Of course, it was natural that Kaylee should want to get rid of his guests as soon as the tragedy was discovered. He would want this for their own sake as well as for his. But he had been a little too quick about suggesting it, and about seeing the suggestion carried out. They had been bustled off as soon as they could be packed. The suggestion that they were in his hands to go or stay as he wished could have been left safely to them. As it was, they had been given no alternative, and Miss Norris, who had proposed to catch an after-dinner train at the junction, in the obvious hope that she might have in this way a dramatic cross-examination at the hands of some keen-eyed detective, was encouraged tactfully, but quite firmly, to travel by the earlier train with the others. Antony had felt that Kaylee, in the tragedy, which had suddenly befallen the house, ought to have been equally indifferent to her presence or absence. But he was not, and Antony assumed from this that Kaylee was very much alive to the necessity for her absence. Why? Well, that question was not to be answered offhand, but the fact that it was so had made Antony interested in her, and it was for this reason that he had followed up so alertly Bill's casual mention of her in connection with the dressing-up business. He felt that he wanted to know a little more about Miss Norris and the part she had played in the Red House circle. By sheer luck, as it seemed to him, he had stumbled on the answer to his question. Miss Norris was hurried away because she knew about the secret passage. The passage, then, had something to do with the mystery of Robert's death. Miss Norris had used it in order to bring off her dramatic appearance as the ghost. Possibly she had discovered it for herself. Possibly Mark had revealed it to her secretly one day, never guessing that she would make so unkind a use of it later on. Possibly Kaylee, having been let into the joke of the dressing up, had shown her how she could make her appearance on the bowling green even more mysterious and supernatural. One way or another, she knew about the secret passage. So she must be hurried away. Why? Because if she stayed and talked, she might make some innocent mention of it. And Kaylee did not want any mention of it. Why again? Obviously, because the passage, or even the mere knowledge of its existence, might provide a clue. I wonder if Mark's hiding there, thought Antony, and he went to sleep. Chapter 10. Mr. Gillingham Talks Nonsense. Antony came down in a very good humor to breakfast next morning, and found that his host was before him. Kaylee looked up from his letters and nodded. "Any word of Mr. Ablett, of Mark?" said Antony, as he poured out his coffee. "No. The inspector wants to drag the lake this afternoon." "Oh, is there a lake?" There was just the flicker of a smile on Kaylee's face, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Well, it's really a pond," he said, "but it was called the lake." "By Mark?" thought Antony. Aloud he said, "What do they expect to find?" "They think that Mark," he broke off and shrugged his shoulders, "may have drowned himself, knowing that he couldn't get away, and knowing that he had compromised himself by trying to get away at all?" "Yes, I suppose so," said Kaylee slowly. "I should have thought he would have given himself more of a run for his money. After all, he had a revolver. If he was determined not to be taken alive, he could always have prevented that. Couldn't he have caught a train to London before the police knew anything about it? He might just have managed it. There was a train. They would have noticed him at Woodham, of course, but he might have managed it at Stanton. He's not so well known there, naturally. The inspector has been inquiring. Nobody seems to have seen him. There are sure to be people who will say they did, later on. There was never a missing man yet, but a dozen people come forward who swear to have seen him at a dozen different places at the same time." Kaylee smiled. "Yes, that's true. Anyhow, he wants to drag the pond first." He added dryly, "From what I've read of detective stories, inspectors always do want to drag the pond first." "Is it deep?" "Quite deep enough," said Kaylee as he got up. On his way to the door, he stopped and looked at Antony. "I'm so sorry that we're keeping you here like this, but it will only be until tomorrow. The inquest is tomorrow afternoon. Do amuse yourself how you like till then. Beverly will look after you." "Thanks very much. I shall really be quite all right." Antony went on with his breakfast. Perhaps it was true that inspectors liked dragging ponds, but the question was, Did Kaylee's like having them dragged? Was Kaylee anxious about it, or quite indifferent? He certainly did not seem to be anxious, but he could hide his feelings very easily beneath that heavy, solid face, and it was not often that the real Kaylee peeped out. Just a little too eager once or twice, perhaps, but there was nothing to be learnt from it this morning. Perhaps he knew that the pond had no secrets to give up. After all, inspectors were always dragging ponds. Bill came in noisily. Bill's face was an open book. Excitement was written all over it. "Well," he said eagerly as he sat down to the business of the meal, "what are we going to do this morning?" "Not talk so loudly, for one thing," said Anthony. Bill looked about him apprehensively. Was Kaylee under the table, for example? After last night, one never knew. He raised his eyebrows. "No, but one doesn't want to shout. One should modulate the voice, my dear William, while breathing gently from the hips. Thus one avoids those chest notes which have betrayed many a secret. In other words, pass the toast." "You seem bright this morning." "I am, very bright." Kaylee noticed it. Kaylee said, "Were it not that I have other business, I would come gathering nuts and may with thee. Fain would I gyrate round the mulberry bush and hop upon the little hills, but the waters of Jordan encompass me, and Inspector Birch tarries outside with his shrimping net. My friend William Beverley will attend thee anon. Farewell, a long farewell to all. Thy grape nuts." He then left up center. Enter W. Beverley, R. "Are you often like this at breakfast?" "Almost invariably," said he with his mouth full. Exit W. Beverley, L. "It's a touch of the sun, I suppose," said Bill, shaking his head sadly. "It's the sun and the moon and the stars, all acting together on an empty stomach. Do you know anything about the stars, Mr. Beverley? Do you know anything about Orion's belt, for instance? And why isn't there a star called Beverley's Belt? Or a novel?" said he, masticating. Re-enter W. Beverley through trapdoor. "Talking about trapdoors." "Don't," said Anthony, getting up. "Some talk of Alexander and some of Hercules, but nobody talks about, what's the Latin for trapdoor? Mensa, a table. You might get it from that. Well, Mr. Beverley," and he slapped him heartily on the back as he went past him. "I shall see you later. Kaylee says that you will amuse me, but so far you have not made me laugh once. You must try and be more amusing when you have finished your breakfast. But don't hurry. Let the upper mandibles have time to do the work." With those words, Mr. Gillingham then left the spacious apartment. Bill continued his breakfast with a slightly bewildered air. He did not know that Kaylee was smoking a cigarette outside the windows behind him. Not listening, perhaps. Possibly not even overhearing. But within sight of Anthony, who was not going to take any risks. So he went on with his breakfast, reflecting that Anthony was a rum fellow, and wondering if he had dreamed only of the amazing things which had happened the day before. Anthony went up to his bedroom to fetch his pipe. It was occupied by a housemaid, and he made a polite apology for disturbing her. Then he remembered. "Is it Elsie?" he asked, giving her a friendly smile. "Yes, sir," she said, shy but proud. She had no doubts as to why it was that she had achieved such notoriety. "It was you who heard Mr. Mark yesterday, wasn't it? I hope the inspector was nice to you." "Yes, thank you, sir. It's my turn now. You wait," murmured Anthony to himself. "Yes, sir, nasty-like," meaning to say his chance had come. "I wonder." "Well, that's what I heard, sir, truly." Anthony looked at her thoughtfully and nodded. "Yes, I wonder. I wonder why." "Why what, sir?" "Oh, lots of things, Elsie. It was quite an accident your being outside just then." Elsie blushed. She had not forgotten what Mrs. Stevens had said about it. "Quite, sir. In the general way I use the other stairs." Of course. He had found his pipe and was about to go downstairs again when she stopped him. "I beg your pardon, sir, but will there be an inquest?" "Oh, yes. Tomorrow, I think." "Shall I have to give my evidence, sir?" "Of course. There's nothing to be frightened of." "I did hear it, sir. Truly." "Why, of course you did. Who says you didn't?" "Some of the others, sir. Mrs. Stevens and all." "Oh, that's just because they're jealous," said Anthony with a smile. He was glad to have spoken to her, because he had recognized at once the immense importance of her evidence. To the inspector, no doubt, it had seemed only of importance in that it had shown Mark to have adopted something of a threatening attitude towards his brother. To Anthony, it had much more significance. It was the only trustworthy evidence that Mark had been in the office at all that afternoon. For who saw Mark go into the office? Only Cayley. And if Cayley had been hiding the truth about the keys, why should he not be hiding the truth about Mark's entry into the office? Obviously, all Cayley's evidence went for nothing. Some of it, no doubt, was true, but he was giving it, both truth and falsehood, with a purpose. What the purpose was, Anthony did not know as yet. To shield Mark, to shield himself, even to betray Mark. It might be any of these, but since his evidence was given for his own ends, it was impossible that it could be treated as the evidence of an impartial and trustworthy onlooker. Such, for instance, as Elsie appeared to be. Elsie's evidence, however, seemed to settle the point. Mark had gone into the office to see his brother. Elsie had heard them both talking. And then Anthony and Cayley had found the body of Robert. And the inspector was going to drag the pond. But certainly, Elsie's evidence did not prove anything more than the mere presence of Mark in the room. "It's my turn now. You wait." That was not an immediate threat. It was a threat for the future. If Mark had shot his brother immediately afterwards, it must have been an accident, the result of a struggle, say, provoked by that nasty-like tone of voice. Nobody would say, "You wait," to a man who was just going to be shot. "You wait" meant you wait and see what's going to happen to you later on. The owner of the Red House had had enough of his brother's sponging, his brother's blackmail. Now it was Mark's turn to get a bit of his own back. Let Robert just wait a bit, and he would see. The conversation which Elsie had overheard might have meant something like this. It couldn't have meant murder. Anyway, not murder of Robert by Mark. "It's a funny business," thought Anthony. "The one obvious solution is so easy, and yet so wrong. And I've got 100 things in my head, and I can't fit them together. And this afternoon will make 101. I mustn't forget this afternoon." He found Bill in the hall and proposed a stroll. Bill was only too ready. "Where do you want to go?" he asked. "I don't mind much. Show me the park." "Righto." They walked out together. "Watson, old man," said Anthony, as soon as they were away from the house, "you really mustn't talk so loudly indoors. There was a gentleman outside, just behind you, all the time." "Oh, I say," said Bill, going pink. "I'm awfully sorry. So that's why you were talking such rot." "Partly, yes, and partly because I do feel rather bright this morning. We're going to have a busy day." "Are we really? What are we going to do?" "They're going to drag the pond, beg its pardon, the lake." "Where is the lake?" "We're on the way to it now, if you'd like to see it." "We may as well look at it. Do you haunt the lake much in the ordinary way?" "Oh no, rather not. There's nothing to do there. You can't bathe? Well, I shouldn't care to. Too dirty. I see. This is the way we came yesterday, isn't it? The way to the village? Yes, we go off a bit to the right directly. What are they dragging it for? Mark? Oh, rot, said Bill uneasily. He was silent for a little, and then, forgetting his uncomfortable thoughts in his sudden remembrance of the exciting times they were having, said eagerly, I say, when are we going to look for that passage? We can't do very much while Kaylee's in the house. What about this afternoon when they're dragging the pond? He's sure to be there. Anthony shook his head. There's something I must do this afternoon, he said. Of course we might have time for both. Has Kaylee got to be out of the house for the other thing too? Well, I think he ought to be. I say, is it anything rather exciting? I don't know. It might be rather interesting. I dare say I could do it at some other time, but I rather fancy it at 3 o'clock somehow. I've been specially keeping it back for then. I say, what fun. You do want me, don't you? Of course I do. Only Bill, don't talk about things inside the house unless I begin. There's a good Watson. I won't. I swear I won't. They had come to the pond, Mark's lake, and they walked silently round it. When they had made the circle, Anthony sat down on the grass and relit his pipe. Bill followed his example. Well, Mark isn't there, said Anthony. No, said Bill. At least, I don't quite see why you know he isn't. It isn't knowing, it's guessing, said Anthony rapidly. It's much easier to shoot yourself than to drown yourself. And if Mark had wanted to shoot himself in the water, with some idea of not letting the body be found, he'd have put big stones in his pockets, and the only big stones are near the water's edge, and they would have left marks. And they haven't, and therefore he didn't. And, oh, bother the pond, that can wait till this afternoon. Bill, where does the secret passage begin? Well, that's what we've got to find out, isn't it? Yes, you see, my idea is this. He explained his reasons for thinking that the secret of the passage was concerned in some way with the secret of Robert's death, and went on. My theory is that Mark discovered the passage about a year ago, the time when he began to get keen on croquet. The passage came out into the floor of the shed, and probably it was Kaylee's idea to put a croquet box over the trap door, so as to hide it more completely. You know, when once you've discovered a secret yourself, it always seems as if it must be so obvious to everybody else. I can imagine that Mark loved having this little secret all to himself. And to Kaylee, of course, but Kaylee wouldn't count. And they must have had great fun fixing it up and making it more difficult for other people to find out. Well then, when Miss Norris was going to dress up, Kaylee gave it away. Probably he told her that she could never get down to the bowling green without being discovered, and then perhaps showed that he knew there was one way in which she could do it, and she wormed the secret out of him somehow. But this was 2 or 3 days before Robert turned up. Exactly. I am not suggesting that there was anything sinister about the passage in the first place. It was just a little private bit of romance and adventure for Mark 3 days ago. He didn't even know that Robert was coming. But somehow the passage has been used since in connection with Robert. Perhaps Mark escaped that way. Perhaps he's hiding there now. And if so, then the only person who could give him away was Miss Norris. And she, of course, would only do it innocently, not knowing that the passage had anything to do with it. So it was safer to have her out of the way, yes. But look here, Tony, why do you want to bother about this end of it? We can always get in at the bowling green end. I know, but if we do that, we shall have to do it openly. It will mean breaking open the box, and letting Kaylee know that we've done it. You see, Bill, if we don't find anything out for ourselves in the next day or two, we've got to tell the police what we have found out, and then they can explore the passage for themselves. But I don't want to do that yet. Rather not. So we've got to carry on secretly for a bit. It's the only way. He smiled and added, and it's much more fun. Rather, Bill chuckled to himself. Very well, where does the secret passage begin? Chapter 11. The Reverend Theodore Ussher. There's one thing which we have got to realize at once, said Anthony, and that is that if we don't find it easily, we shan't find it at all. You mean that we shan't have time? Neither time nor opportunity, which is rather a consoling thought to a lazy person like me. But it makes it much harder if we can't really look properly. Harder to find, yes, but so much easier to look. For instance, the passage might begin in Kaylee's bedroom. Well, now we know that it doesn't. We don't know anything of the sort, protested Bill. We know for the purposes of our search. Obviously, we can't go tailing into Kaylee's bedroom and tapping his wardrobes. And obviously, therefore, if we are going to look for it at all, we must assume that it doesn't begin there. Oh, I see. Bill chewed a piece of grass thoughtfully. Anyhow, it wouldn't begin on an upstairs floor, would it? Probably not. Well, we're getting on. You can wash out the kitchen and all that part of the house, said Bill, after more thought. We can't go there. Right, and the cellars, if there are any. Well, that doesn't leave us much. No, of course it's only 100 to 1 chance that we find it, but what we want to consider is which is the most likely place of the few places in which we can look safely. All it amounts to, said Bill, is the living rooms downstairs, dining room, library, hall, billiard room, and the office rooms. Yes, that's all. Well, the office is the most likely, isn't it? Yes, except for one thing. What's that? Well, it's on the wrong side of the house. One would expect the passage to start from the nearest place to which it is going. Why make it longer by going under the house first? Yes, that's true. Well, then you think the dining room or the library? Yes, and the library for choice. I mean for our choice. There are always servants going into dining rooms. We shouldn't have much of a chance of exploring properly in there. Besides, there's another thing to remember. Mark has kept this a secret for a year. Could he have kept it a secret in the dining room? Could Miss Norris have got into the dining room and used the secret door just after dinner without being seen? It would have been much too risky. Bill got up eagerly. Come along, he said. Let's try the library. If Kaylee comes in, we can always pretend we're choosing a book. Anthony got up slowly, took his arm, and walked back to the house with him. The library was worth going into. Passages or no passages, Anthony could never resist another person's bookshelves. As soon as he went into the room, he found himself wandering round it to see what books the owner read, or, more likely, did not read, but kept for the air which they lent to the house. Mark had prided himself on his library. It was a mixed collection of books, books which he had inherited both from his father and from his patron. Books which he had bought because he was interested in them, or if not in them, in the authors to whom he wished to lend his patronage. Books which he had ordered in beautifully bound editions, partly because they looked well on his shelves, lending a noble color to his rooms, partly because no man of culture should ever be without them. Old editions, new editions, expensive books, cheap books, a library in which everybody, whatever his taste, could be sure of finding something to suit him. "And which is your particular fancy, Bill?" said Antony, looking from one shelf to another. "Or are you always playing billiards?" "I have a look at badminton sometimes," said Bill. "It's over in that corner there." He waved a hand. "Over here?" said Antony, going to it. "Yes." He corrected himself suddenly. "Oh no, it's not. It's over there on the right now. Mark had a grand rearrangement of his library about a year ago. It took him more than a week, he told us. He's got such a frightful lot, hasn't he?" "Now that's very interesting," said Antony, and he sat down and filled his pipe again. There was indeed a frightful lot of books. The four walls of the library were plastered with them from floor to ceiling, save only where the door and the two windows insisted on living their own life, even though an illiterate one. To Bill it seemed the most hopeless room of any in which to look for a secret opening. "We shall have to take every blessed book down," he said, "before we can be certain that we haven't missed it." "Anyway," said Antony, "if we take them down one at a time, nobody can suspect us of sinister designs. After all, what does one go into a library for, except to take books down? But there's such a frightful lot." Antony's pipe was now going satisfactorily, and he got up and walked leisurely to the end of the wall opposite the door. "Well, let's have a look," he said, "and see if they are so very frightful. Hello, here's your badminton. You often read that, you say?" "If I read anything, yes." He looked down and up the shelf. "Sport and travel chiefly. I like books of travel, don't you?" "They're pretty dull as a rule." "Well, anyhow, some people like them very much," said Antony reproachfully. "I thought not. And when did Miss Calladine last read The Excursion aloud to you?" "As a matter of fact, Betty, Miss Calladine, happens to be jolly keen on what's the beggar's name." "Never mind his name. You had said quite enough. We pass on." He moved on to the next shelf. "Biography. Oh, lots of it. I love biographies. Are you a member of the Johnson Club? I bet Mark is. Memories of Many Courts. I'm sure Mrs. Calladine reads that. Anyway, biographies are just as interesting as most novels. So why linger? We pass on." He went to the next shelf and then gave a sudden whistle. "Hello, hello!" "What's the matter?" said Bill rather peevishly. "Stand back there. Keep the crowd back, Bill. We're getting amongst it. Sermons, as I live, sermons. Was Mark's father a clergyman, or does Mark take to them naturally?" "His father was a parson, I believe. Oh yes, I know he was." "Ah, then these are father's books. Half Hours with the Infinite. I must order that from the library when I get back. The Lost Sheep, Jones on the Trinity, the Epistles of St. Paul Explained. Oh, Bill, we're amongst it. The Narrow Way, being sermons by the Reverend Theodore Ussher. Hello, what is the matter?" "William, I am inspired. Stand by." He took down the Reverend Theodore Ussher's classic work, looked at it with a happy smile for a moment, and then gave it to Bill. "Here, hold Ussher for a bit." Bill took the book obediently. "No, give it me back. Just go out into the hall and see if you can hear Cayley anywhere. Say hello loudly if you do." Bill went out quickly, listened, and came back. "It's all right." "Good." He took the book out of its shelf again. "Now then, you can hold Ussher. Hold him in the left hand so. With the right or dexter hand, grasp this shelf firmly, so. Now, when I say pull, pull gradually. Got that?" Bill nodded, his face alight with excitement. "Good." Antony put his hand into the space left by the stout Ussher and fingered the back of the shelf. "Pull," he said. Bill pulled. "Now just go on pulling like that. I shall get it directly." Not hard, you know, but just keeping up the strain. His fingers went at it again busily, and then suddenly the whole row of shelves, from top to bottom, swung gently open towards them. "Good Lord," said Bill, letting go of the shelf in his amazement. Anthony pushed the shelves back, extracted Ussher from Bill's fingers, replaced him, and then, taking Bill by the arm, led him to the sofa and deposited him in it. Standing in front of him, he bowed gravely. "Child's play, Watson," he said. "Child's play." "How on earth?" Anthony laughed happily and sat down on the sofa beside him. "You don't really want it explained," he said, smacking him on the knee. "You're just being Watsonish. It's very nice of you, of course, and I appreciate it. No, but really, Tony, oh my dear Bill." He smoked silently for a little, and then went on. "It's what I was saying just now. A secret is a secret until you have discovered it. And as soon as you have discovered it, you wonder why everybody else isn't discovering it, and how it could ever have been a secret at all. This passage has been here for years, with an opening at one end into the library, and at the other end into the shed. Then Mark discovered it, and immediately he felt that everybody else must discover it. So he made the shed end more difficult by putting the croquet box there, and this end more difficult by—" He stopped and looked at the other. "By what, Bill?" But Bill was being Watsonish. What? Obviously, by rearranging his books. He happened to take out The Life of Nelson, or Three Men in a Boat, or whatever it was, and by the merest chance discovered the secret. Naturally, he felt that everybody else would be taking down The Life of Nelson, or Three Men in a Boat. Naturally, he felt that the secret would be safer if nobody ever interfered with that shelf at all. When you said that the books had been rearranged a year ago, just about the time the croquet box came into existence, of course, I guessed why. So I looked about for the dullest books I could find, the books nobody ever read. Obviously, the collection of sermon books of a mid-Victorian clergyman was the shelf we wanted. Yes, I see. But why were you so certain of the particular place? Well, he had to mark the particular place by some book. I thought that the joke of putting the narrow way just over the entrance to the passage might appeal to him. Apparently, it did. Bill nodded to himself thoughtfully several times. "Yes, that's very neat," he said. "You're a clever devil, Tony." Tony laughed. "You encourage me to think so, which is bad for me, but very delightful." "Well, come on then," said Bill, and he got up and held out a hand. "Come on where?" "To explore the passage, of course." Anthony shook his head. "Why ever not?" "Well, what do you expect to find there?" "I don't know, but you seem to think that we might find something that would help." "Suppose we find Mark," said Anthony quietly. "I say, do you really think he's there?" "Suppose he is." "Well then, there we are." Anthony walked over to the fireplace, knocked out the ashes of his pipe, and turned back to Bill. He looked at him gravely without speaking. "What are you going to say to him?" he said at last. "How do you mean? Are you going to arrest him or help him to escape?" Well, of course, began Bill, stammering, and then ended lamely. "Well, I don't know." "Exactly. We've got to make up our minds, haven't we?" Bill didn't answer. Very much disturbed in his mind, he walked restlessly about the room, frowning to himself, stopping now and then at the newly discovered door, and looking at it as if he were trying to learn what lay behind it. Which side was he on, if it came to choosing sides, Mark's or the law's? You know you can't just say, "Oh, hello" to him, said Antony, breaking rather appropriately into his thoughts. Bill looked up at him with a start. "Nor," went on Antony, "can you say, 'This is my friend Mr. Gillingham, who is staying with you. We were just going to have a game of bowls.' Yes, it's dashed difficult. I don't know what to say. I've been rather forgetting about Mark." He wandered over to the window and looked out onto the lawns. There was a gardener clipping the grass edges. No reason why the lawn should be untidy just because the master of the house had disappeared. It was going to be a hot day again. Dash it! Of course he had forgotten Mark. How could he think of him as an escaped murderer, a fugitive from justice, when everything was going on just as it did yesterday and the sun was shining just as it did when they all drove off to their golf, only 24 hours ago? How could he help feeling that this was not real tragedy, but merely a jolly kind of detective game that he and Antony were playing? He turned back to his friend. "All the same," he said, "you wanted to find the passage, and now you've found it. Aren't you going into it at all?" Antony took his arm. "Let's go outside again," he said. "We can't go into it now, anyhow. It's too risky, with Kaylee about. Bill, I feel like you, just a little bit frightened. But what I'm frightened of, I don't quite know. Anyway, you want to go on with it, don't you?" "Yes," said Bill firmly. "We must. Then we'll explore the passage this afternoon, if we get the chance. And if we don't get the chance, then we'll try it tonight." They walked across the hall and out into the sunlight again. "Do you really think we might find Mark hiding there?" asked Bill. "It's possible," said Antony. "Either Mark or—" He pulled himself up quickly. "No," he murmured to himself. "I won't let myself think that. Not yet, anyway. It's too horrible." And that brings us to the end of chapters 1 to 11. Let us know in the comments how the story felt to you. Your feedback means a lot. The next part will be uploaded soon. Thank you for listening.